Hi, good morning. Thanks very much for that introduction. Thank you very much to everybody who's braved the elements, the traffic, and Russell Square too being flooded to get here. We really appreciate that. We appreciate your time today, and hopefully it'll be a really good investment of that time. You might well wonder what the Carbon Trust is doing, what we bring to this party. To some degree, we're on the front line of helping organisations move to net zero, plot their pathways, their routes, understand those challenges, and, as you said, navigate your way through those challenges. So, to some degree, we're behind the scenes. We don't do advocacy, but we absolutely do a lot of work supporting organisations around the world, typically on net zero related activity. So that's going to be the focus very much for today. I have to say I'm really quite excited to have an in-person event. I think that in itself is worth celebrating. Before we get going, I'd just like maybe to share a few sort of insights from the front line as we see it. Now, these insights will be mine, they're not the organisation's, and different people within the Carbon Trust have different areas of experience. We have some of our international colleagues who happen to be in London. We're having a great mission day on Thursday, so some of our international colleagues are here. They will certainly bring a different perspective on net zero, different sectors and so on. But my little set of sort of top thoughts would be as follows. Firstly, it's hard. Net zero is seriously challenging. The more we all get into it, the more hard and difficult and challenging it seems. And that is kind of a reality check for this year, but it actually builds on some fundamentals that have been around for a while. So the first thing I'd just like to outline in my own thoughts are, what are the net zero delivery risks? What are the risks that this just doesn't happen the way we all need it to and at the pace that is required? And in essence, why we shouldn't declare victory now. And there is a great temptation to say, hey, we've got the legislation, the government's backing it, thank heavens it's essentially it's a bipartisan support for net zero in the UK. It's not politicised, let's go. No, there are some fundamental challenges that we face. The first is pace. Almost everything happens in the business world on a cycle and pace governed by how fast you can invest, what kind of pace of return you expect, how fast you can adopt a new technology or penetrate a new market. All of those are pretty well determined, and we understand what the pace of change is. Well, net zero requires us to accelerate the pace of change very materially, deploying new technologies, new solutions with new capital flows far quicker than would be the norm in almost any other sector of the economy broadly. So the first one, pace. The second one is lock-in. One of the problems we've got in net zero is that it implies change to pretty much everything. Now, if you're sitting in an organisation with fully depreciated assets that still deliver a good economic rent, you're doing fine. The business is looking okay until those assets reach the end of their natural life. If you are the manager responsible for an organisation where essentially you can continue delivering an economic rent for the next 5-10 years, it's in many cases in your interest not to see change happen. So lock-in of investment, lock-in of assets, lock-in of behaviours, lock-in of expectations is a real problem for net zero transition. And at the end of the day, it supports an alternative narrative which sadly doesn't say we reach net zero. It says the status quo prevails and we never get there. And that's a frightening thought. The third area of challenge is more technical. It's that decarbonisation requires a lot of solutions, technologies that are often unique and not related necessarily to anything that else has been done before. And the question of natural owner comes up. For a long time, renewables at scale was held back because companies that were good at taking big investment and technology risk didn't necessarily want to be in the renewable space, and companies that had maybe a natural affinity with the market that renewables, think of utilities and power companies, didn't necessarily have the expertise of doing the significant investment in innovation at scale. So no natural owner, big problem. And the last of my sort of big problems, and this is the one which we all refer to, is that to accelerate the change that we need to achieve net zero, requires an awful lot of people to come together on the same page. You need governments setting sensible policy and regulation. You need organizations who back their investors. You need investors who are themselves ambitious. You need consumers who are understanding of change and supportive of it. And all of that has got to come together in the face of democratic stiction. Democracy is a wonderful thing, but at times it makes it difficult to see progress and change happen as quickly as we need. So those are the sort of doomsday. These are the things that are fundamental, very challenging, and that we see the whole time in the work that we do. So more positively, what are some of the sort of pragmatic options that pretty much any organization can do now, particularly a leading organization who's thinking, okay, I think I've done the kind of basics, but what do I do next on my journey? And I'd say the first thing is just to address that lock-in question by focusing future investment that avoids lock-in. You know, if you're going to do something big and make a big change, then make it consistent with net zero. Don't lock in. That is just daft. The second is to take whatever net zero strategy, claims, disclosures you've already made and ensure that those are underpinned by bottom-up pathways that are sensible, credible, sense-checked, and have good milestones for delivery. It's blindingly obvious. I think most of the organizations in this room understand the challenge of actually matching the net zero narrative to an underlying plan that makes sense to you. The third area, I think, is to recognize that a lot of organizations will start the journey to net zero by optimizing pretty much the business that they have. Then they will look for the first few things they can do, which are investments within the cycle of how the organization is running and are things that they feel they should be doing. But there's going to come a point at which net zero requires, in most businesses, a level of transformation that is fundamental. It may transform the products and services that the organization is involved with. It may involve a different market, a different mindset, a new technology. But whatever it is, that big transformation that's going to come somewhere down the track needs to be understood early, not late. So the one other thing is develop options now for what you might need to be doing in 15, 20 years' time. They can't be proven, because in many cases the solutions aren't there. But at least the options need to be thought about right now, up front. That avoids the problem where you sort of run out of good things to do and you're not ready yet for a big transformation. And I think the last thing I would say everybody can do is really focus on transparency and disclosure. The one thing about the sustainability sector is, unlike most other areas where, that's commercially confidential is acceptable. The term, this is commercially confidential, so I'm not going to share how you do best practice in net zero, it is pretty challenging to maintain as a narrative with any stakeholder these days. So the best option, transparency and disclosure. Be as transparent, disclose as fully as you possibly can, the good, the bad, and the ugly. A lot of things are changing. What you need to disclose, by, when, to whom, in what format is an evolving process. It's going to take a long time to continue evolving. The main thing is to disclose honestly and fully as far as you can. And to the point of sincerity, the word's been used, it's highly emotive, but really just make sure that your net zero is sincere, is true, because that will be a real test that you'll be able to then hold up to all of the stakeholder relationships that you have. And so on the last point I'd like to make, it's that net zero itself is very challenging. It's challenging because it isn't that well defined. It's challenging because everybody has their own interpretation of what it means. The government will talk about net zero on a geographic basis. Most organizations will talk about net zero on a value chain basis. It's like trying to account for something that's orthogonal. It doesn't make sense. But nevertheless, the term is powerful. It means the right thing. The end point is the same. And that's the important thing. Now, why, therefore, is net zero often wrong? Well, I think there are three sort of categories of risk to fall in with. The first is that a lot of net zero pathways are based on implausible assumptions. Now, you might happen to believe that assumption, either because you genuinely believe it or because it's the only way you can see your way through to net zero. But if those assumptions are implausible, then at the end of the day, the plan will start to unravel. The second is that net zero plans, in theory, all come together to create net zero for us all at the end. Unfortunately, you can't add up net zero plans. A lot of people have net zero plans that rely on the same natural resources, land use. And all of a sudden, you add up the net zero pathways for a number of key sectors, and you find that planetary boundaries are going to be broken. We don't have enough land to do what they say they need to do. So it might be net zero for them, but it's certainly not zero for all of us. And the last, and perhaps the most dangerous look at net zero, is the one where somebody comes along and very cynically says, I'm going to say net zero, I'm even going to do net zero, I'm going to do all those first few things, but we're not going to go net zero in the long term. Our business just doesn't lend itself to a net zero pathway. So very cynically, you're doing it with no real intent of pursuing it. And yet you're telling everybody else is there, everybody else is counting on you, your supply chain, value chain will all be assuming that, well, they're up for net zero, but they're not. So those are just a few insights and thoughts from the front line of net zero as I see it. Today you're going to have a fantastic range of opportunities to see and understand net zero through many different angles. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going to be around for most of the day. Please, I'd love to meet as many people as possible today. But more importantly, and I think as we've heard, make sure that today works for you and that you take away from today something that's really valuable. There's loads and loads and loads of content. And if there's something at the back of your mind that you'd love to know that just hasn't come up somewhere on the agenda, please grab one of the Carbon Trust team and just say, can we address this question? Because I think it's important. Okay, I hope you enjoy the day. I'll be with you. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks, Tom. Lots of really, really fascinating information covered there. Just to kind of summarize, things you don't want to do, have implausible assumptions that are absolutely not the sort of thing that you can meet. Understanding that you can't just add up all net zero and it's going to work. It doesn't work like that. And avoid doing things when you don't really believe it can happen. But the main things to focus on that I took away from what Tom shared is focus on future plans and that can avoid lock-in. You know, when you're thinking about those future plans, really think about lock-in. Match the narrative to the plan. If you're saying you're going to do something, then let's not create new plans that aren't aligned. Match the narrative to the plan. Understand those big transformation options early. At some point, we're not going to be able to just change swap out to wooden spoons and stuff like that. At some point, it's going to have to be a big fundamental change. Understand what some of those options are early. And transparency and disclosure, this is one of those areas where we just can't hide. The more open, the more honest, the more sincere we can be, the better. So carrying on this theme of diving into and understanding the challenges, our next speaker oversees the Green Bond Development Programs on 6 continents, now with an estimated 2.5 trillion outstanding. Here to talk about the challenges of transition, the CEO of Climate Bonds Initiative, which is an international NGO working on mobilizing global capital in climate action. Please give a warm round of applause for Sean Kidney.
Thank you. What a fabulous crowd. Everyone working on climate change. Isn't that incredible to be in a room of people? The privilege we have of being able to address this species-defying problem that we have and to work on solutions. But let me give you a few comments first about the challenge. We'll then talk about the wins we're having and next in my comments. I'm assuming you all follow climate science, but let me just restate some obvious things. We have lost the fight for 1.5. And yes, it is true. Some people are saying, oh, well, that means we can just aim for 2. It's cool, right? I can build more coal plants. Doesn't quite work that way, unfortunately. We are still aiming to stabilise global temperatures at 1.5, which will mean substantial sequestration in the 30s. With an aim of trying to get temperatures back down with large-scale carbon withdrawal. But as the World Meteorological Organization says, we will now reach 1.5 degrees into 2027 or 2028. No surprise there. We have been not doing very well on reducing emissions despite the work we've been doing for the last 20 years. In fact, you'd have to say we have failed dramatically and drastically in addressing climate, despite the work that we seem to be doing. Of course, that failure is tied to certain sectors. It's tied to China, it's tied to the US, it's tied to the coal industry continuing to export more exports of coal this year than ever before in history, etc. I won't go into the forensic detail. I will simply say that the challenge now is even sharper and more extraordinary than it was a few years ago when I first came into the Carbon Trust building and met Tom DeLay some 12 years ago. The IPCC says very clearly that we've got to get emissions down on average globally by 55% by 2030. And that's not actually a target, that's a minimum requirement. And that only buys us 50% chance of avoiding catastrophic climate change. I mean, what the hell are we doing? It just seems extraordinary that we're still having this fight, but it is the case that we're having this fight. The consequences of the climate change that is now baked into the system, that is now certain, the 2 degrees Celsius we're going to get, are in themselves catastrophic. We are going to see large scale of loss of life this decade. You might have seen a story yesterday about the unusual heat deaths in Uttar Pradesh over the last month. There's a question about how authorities are reporting those to make sure they don't look bad, etc. It's quite clear in Uttar Pradesh death rates are already up, and Uttar Pradesh is my big fear because this is a very poor state with a vast population and hardly any air conditioning to escape if you do have an energy system that can't support air conditioning. We will see these kinds of crises. We will see heat like in Sichuan last year, with people dying in the street because the government insisted they queued for COVID tests in 50 degrees Celsius heat. We will see floods in Pakistan or in the Po Valley, those sort of things. This is the new norm. The real question is just how tricky it's going to get, how quickly, and whether we can stabilise temperatures. One thing's for sure, because climate change is beginning to impact now and is going to get quite severe quite quickly, we have to start thinking about resilience, well, like today. We have to prepare our societies. That's physical resilience, clearly. Sea level rises, heat insulation in cities around tropical belts, and in places like London, where we're going to start seeing 40 degrees Celsius temperatures, which will see a lot of old people dying if they haven't been able to adapt them. And we're also going to look at social resilience, because in a world of constant crises, what really counts is not the extent to which we've prepared physically, although that is going to make a life or death difference to some of us, but the extent to which we can work together to bounce back. Now that means that when we think about climate resilience, we are not just thinking about sea level protection. We are thinking about the strength and wealth of our societies and our communities. Understand that. In other words, the social dimension is not just a nice have-to on the side, it is essential to being able to survive catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe. In a study that's been done in San Francisco on the extent to which people recover after earthquakes, it's very clear that at least 40% of the recovery rate that we see is tied to the extent to which communities know each other. If you live in a street where you don't know your neighbours, you are more likely to die if a catastrophe happens. If you live in a street where you know your neighbours and they know you, someone who is a neighbour is more likely to come and help you in times of catastrophe. It's as crude as that. San Francisco has actually gone into a program now funding block parties, neighbourhood parties, on the basis that these are important climate resilience activities, or in this case, earthquake resilience activities, in their case, with some conditions. You have to invite every single person in the block to be there because you can't afford Joe Bloggs on level 37, who's a grumpy old bastard, to not be included because in a crisis he will die unless someone knows he's there and gets him. The understanding of what it is that we have to do is broadening very quickly. Yes, it is about mitigation, obviously. The urgency of mitigation will allow us to create a future which is at least as survivable and possible for our kids. If we don't get mitigation down, there is no future for our kids. We will be seeing 6 to 7 degrees warming. And humans have never actually existed on this planet at a time with the GHG levels that we're currently on a trajectory to achieve, or the temperatures that we are currently on a trajectory to achieve. We don't know if humans can survive at 1,000 ppm. We're currently at 426 ppm. Understand that. That's why the mitigation agenda is important. But at the same time, we now need to work on the resilience agenda and work on it quickly if we are to minimise the loss of life that is now, unfortunately, certain and baked into our system. This is not nice stuff. To use an Australian expression, we have fucked it royally. And the madness, of course, as you would know, the madness is that we know what the solutions are. They're clear. I mean, of course, if we followed our climate scientists, the ones that are currently dealing with waves of depression because they've had so little response from governments over the years, epidemics of depression amongst climate scientists, the solutions are very simple. Stop emitting. Now, of course, as you know, it's more complicated than that. But nevertheless, energy transition. We're making good progress, but we have not made anywhere near enough progress. Industrial transition, land use, food systems, etc. We kind of know. That's your day-to-day work. We kind of know what to do. Of course, there is a large capital penalty to doing what we have to do. It will cost, well, McKinsey claimed at the beginning of the year that it was $9.2 trillion a year of investment. At least they use the term investment because there are returns to be made if we construct the solutions the right kind of way. The amount of capital required is, of course, enormous because on top of that there's a resilience. The good news is about 2/3 to 3/4 of what we have to do is the reordering of existing capital. It's not about new things necessarily. There is a new capex penalty. Solar farms cost more than coal power plants, so there's more capital required up front, but there is less OPEX going forward. So that's tricky, but possible. But the bulk of this is actually changing the procurement requirements of what we currently do. Think of heat insulation in cities. If we are able to change the regulatory requirements and enforce regulations in emerging markets, of course, for buildings to ensure we had greater thermal capacity, we will save lives. If we do that in a design stage, we can make substantial progress. That's a low-hanging fruit. Of course, we've got to make it affordable for Lagos or Accra or Sao Paulo. Those solutions are coming through. We're talking of CEMEX at the moment about the massive rollout of low-carbon concrete to replace the high-carbon concrete systems that are currently in production. It looks like there are solutions there in every sector. But when you think about the capital, just one thing to be clear, there is actually no shortage of capital. I often have discussions with people about optimisation investments in grids or energy systems, and I say, don't worry about it. We have a world flooded in capital. We have a world where capital does not have enough places to go. I speak to institutional investors every week around the world. Their biggest problem is placement. They are placing in the oil and gas sector because they haven't got enough places to put it in. There aren't enough German bonds at negative interest rates to buy. So there is no doubt that we actually have the capital. And curiously enough, this capital understands the climate largely. It wants green solutions. We have proof of that, of course, in the green bond market, which has grown now from 2 billion when we started, 2.5 trillion. It's a tiny part of global capital flows, but it's still a very clear indicator of demand on the part of investors and oversubscription. I could place $10 trillion of green bonds tomorrow if you give them to me in the basis of the investor demand we now have. That, well, that is something to celebrate. Let me go through a few things to celebrate, because it's not true that we're not making progress. We are standing on the edge of a cliff, there's no doubt about that. This is the 5 minutes to midnight. But we have made some progress. The big thing, the big milestone of the last few years has been the setting of 2030 targets by major countries around the world, in Europe first and the Biden Climate Summit. Why is that important? Because that has very clearly cemented amongst my constituency, investors around the world, a belief, a certain belief. The future has been decided. It will be green. There is now no doubt amongst major investors of the direction of travel of the global economy. The big worry is speed and who are winners and who are losers. That's fantastic. We can make that work for us. We are making that work for us. When they look at things like taxonomies or green bonds, what they're actually looking for is signals for someone doing something to stay ahead of the tsunami. And of course, that's the major story. That's in Asia as well, not just in Europe and the US. Are you preparing for the change? How are you capitalising on it? When Occidental, an oil company, announced its direct air capture scheme in Texas, fantastic, funded by the IRA by tax credits, the biggest win was not the direct air capture scheme, although that is cool, it was the bounce in the share price they got as a result of being seen to be part of the transition. Shareholders are understanding this. So that's a win for us. There is a tsunami coming through the global economy that investors are certain of. Of course, part of that 2030 targets has been the rise of active governments, which is reinforcing this message. The IRA in the US, fantastic, clumsy, messy, boondoggle for gas, sure. But all I know is it's developing a fantastic construction boom in the South and Republican states, by the way, who will now no longer be able to vote against it in the future. A classic example of good politics. Repower EU is actually making big progress in Europe. Japan, the Green Transformation Fund, I have arguments with the Japanese government about X and Y in it, but I'm going to say, yes, bring it on. Because it is a close working relationship between industry, between capital, and between a government that is finally, after years of acting like a turtle, starting to move. And in Singapore, the government has decided the future is green. Not necessarily because they want to save the planet, they're a tiny state, because they think that's where the money lies, because they think the future economically for Singapore is in becoming a green centre, and they are right. And they are taking some very significant steps to try and change what is not a particularly green economy when it comes to energy, at least. That's a win. We're getting some wins. Regulators. How exciting this has been seen to see the growth of the network for greening the financial system. 120-something central banks now, from nothing. I went to the first meeting years ago. Or the ISSB, or the growth of taxonomies, mandatory in Europe and China, and in many other countries, become 47 countries now. Carbon Trust has been involved in some of those. Or the growth of incentives by regulators. The People's Bank of China has incentives for green bonds. For example, the Reserve Bank of India has incentives for green lending. That's what we need to see. The change is beginning. And of course, we've seen the indicators in sustainable business. We had this wonderful moment about a year and a half ago when the gross revenues from sustainable business of the global banks overtook the gross revenues from fossil fuel business. Yes! You can see how it's changing. What have we got to do? What happens next? How do we get out of this hole we're in? Well, the supertanker is turning. Even in that ghastly carbon-ridden economy of China, we see substantial change. China's invested more in renewable energy every year for the last 15 years. Massive amount again this past year. Last week, just before I saw Tom, I'd been in Shanghai giving a speech and signing an agreement with the Shanghai government, and below me, in the National Exhibition Centre, was the world's largest green industrial exhibition. I could not believe how many halls of industries, green finance, in manufacturing, electric vehicles there were. It was extraordinary. And I've never seen an exhibition centre that big either. This supertanker that we live in globally is starting to move. We clearly need more enabling policy. We don't make the change that we have to make away from the precipice we're standing on without activist states. It doesn't happen. We cannot change society. So I don't mean alone, but I mean we need the enabling policy. One of the things you can do, working with the groups you work with, is to encourage them to develop an agenda and lobby for an agenda of appropriate enabling policy. Think of that as public-private participation, collaboration on solutions. Governments are now interested. In places like the US and Japan and Europe, governments are interested. They want to know what they can do that's relatively fiscally efficient. Sometimes the IRA, which is not fiscally efficient, but fiscally efficient measures, absolutely keen on. I mean, there's 1,000,001 of those. We published our own guide of 101 policies for ministries of finance. We do need to see a shift of the various public sector pools of capital to become climate focused. The EIB and the EBRD have already shifted to 50% climate and the other 50% resilience focused. Good. More leverage. Well, do you know there are 550 development finance institutions in the world? There's an extraordinary number of banks. Virtually none of them do any kind of supported private investment. They all just do direct lending. This is an incredible opportunity for us. Just imagine if we could shift those 500 development finance institutions to become like the EBRD, leverage institutions, focused on climate. Well, that's a winnable proposition. Doesn't require new capital, doesn't require new spending, just requires a change in the procurement requirements. So it's financial institutions, not just industrial plans. We do need to do more to understand what to do, my second point. In resilience especially, we don't know enough about how we prepare. I mentioned the story of San Francisco. There is no other place in the world that's doing that kind of resilience outside of Japan. That requires sharing, especially in emerging markets. 70% of the capex of solutions will be in emerging markets, not in rich countries, going forward. So clarifying and researching what we need to do is essential. But lastly, and most importantly, we are at that flux point in history. We could still, according to the climate scientists, pull this off. Yes, it is a very close call. But if you look at the indicators of greenhouse gas emissions, they are generally still things we can control and address theoretically. But we do have a short window. The indicator of success will be whether we follow the IPCC's prescription, not recommendation, prescription. If we follow the doctor's advice, in other words. How we do that? Well, I'm going to say one thing we need to do. And this, with people like the Glasgow Finance Initiative and Net Zero, is a voice that we are trying to make loud around the world, transition plans everywhere. We have a short window in history to plan the transition. That means you. That means us in this room. All our clients need to have transition plans. In fact, all organisations of any size, listed companies, municipalities, states and provinces, governments, need to have transition plans. Low carbon transition plans first, but also, as we know now, transitions to resilience, transitions to prepare. That's the job. 2 years. In 2 years, we want to feel comfortable. There are transition plans everywhere. So that's this week's crusade, this month's crusade, this year's crusade. We are on the edge of a cliff, but we do actually have a chance, and the super tanker is turning. And I have to say, when I was wandering around those halls in Shanghai, I was so excited because I was thinking, whoa, look how the money is changing industry. We now need to do more. We can't do more without you. We have an extraordinary privilege, as I started. We have an opportunity to work on this topic. We know what the challenges are. Most people don't have a chance to work on this. We can. Of course, with an understanding of the opportunity comes certain responsibilities. It means, as Tom says, we need to push our clients and push our constituencies to make sure that what they do is future fit, is consistent with what we need to do. That's hard. They will need help, including from government. But at least we know what to do, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. Hard, but not impossible. Our next session is actually a panel discussion where you will have the opportunity at the end to ask questions. So if you've been listening to some of these opening keynotes and you've got loads of ideas floating around the back of your head, you've got pens and papers, I can see them there, I'm just giving you a heads up. This is the bit where it gets a bit more interactive. Sean spoke a lot about financing and money and investor priorities, and that's pretty much what this next panel is about. The panel's called Cracking the Code, and it's looking at how do you align investor priorities with those of net zero. To moderate this panel, please welcome to the stage the head of green finance at the Carbon Trust, Pietro Rocco.
I've got to do a mic check. Hopefully you can all hear me. Oh, I can hear myself. I think I'll let you sit in the spotlight. I can sit hidden in the back. And wow, this is a tough act to follow after two very, very good opening keynotes. I think I will try not to use as many Australian expressions as Sean. Keep things a bit more PG. I've got three very illustrious panelists with me today. I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit in a second. But the green finance team at the Carbon Trust is really something I'm very privileged to lead. We work with not just the financial sector, but all our client types across these financial considerations, leveraging our own expertise as former bankers, former investors, to really help our clients navigate what is an increasingly fast-paced and impactful ecosystem, and a great enabler to going towards net zero. So my panelists, welcome. Thank you for coming. We've got Catherine Bohill from Telefonica. Ed Vaughan Dixon from Aviva, and finally Tanya Gear from Barclays. Why don't I let you all introduce yourselves very briefly, and then we can dive into some hard-hitting questions.
Okay, I'll go. Catherine Bohill, Telefonica. I'm an Irish national. I live in Madrid. I look after ESG development, and it's mainly interacting with stakeholders, trying to get all the information from the market and bringing it back home and making sure we get better. So, yes, chill in my blood and in my bones after Mr. Kidney's intervention. And yes, I would be prepared to give one of my kidneys after hearing that, which I'm sure many people here do, because it was invigorating and scary at the same time. But very excited to be here. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Ed, and I'm very lucky to have the role of Head of Responsible Investment for Aviva Investors' real assets business. So if anyone in the audience today has got an insurance policy, life insurance, if you have a pension, that's probably pretty much everyone, then I'm probably working for you. So if you want to grab me after and ask me tricky questions about how we're managing your money, then please do.
Wonderful. Hello, my name is Tanya Gear. I head a team that's called ESG Advisory at Barclays, and we basically work with our clients, that's from large existing clients to smaller companies, pre-IPO companies, on exactly that readiness for ESG, the net zero pathway, and help them on their transition. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, if it's all right with you, happy to dive in. I mean, I was going to start, and it sort of points to something that Sean said around kind of the debt side. It's a lot of focus is on debt, certainly in sustainable finance, and Catherine and Telefonica have been very active in this space. But I wondered, what's happening beyond those listed instruments, particularly around smaller companies. The experience Telefonica's had, Tanya, you mentioned kind of smaller companies as well with IPOs, and Ed, before we kind of got on stage, you were discussing private markets. Why don't I start with Catherine?
Yeah, okay, so Telefonica is quite experienced, and one of the claim to fame here about Telefonica, and not my doing. I worked for Telefonica for many years and just recently joined the sustainability team with the purpose to monetize a little bit all the good work we've been doing. And on the, we've had a board committee dedicated to ESG factors since 2000. So it's a long time there, and there's a long-standing commitment. And on the debt market, we were the first in the sector, but it took until 2019 to do that, to issue a green bond, and we're the first to issue a sustainable, a hybrid bond also, and we are now the largest issuer in the sector. But we're trying to take it beyond, and from the equity perspective too. The telco sector is an enabler, and we strongly believe that digitalisation can decarbonise, help the economy to decarbonise. And we're struggling a little bit with the regulators to bring that message home. But ultimately, we think that there's scariness out there, and I did like Sean's hope at the end, but there's also a lot of opportunities. And at Telefonica, we're looking at this as a transition to value. Where is this transitioning helping our business case, making a better company, making a more sustainable company, and ultimately being green and being good will transition to value, and that's what we're about. So that's definitely about tapping into all aspects, debt and equity side.
I mean, just jumping to Tanya for a second. I mean, on that equity side, I guess it's something we don't always hear about. I mean, it's not labelled in the same way as maybe the credit space. So from Barclays' perspective, what are you seeing, particularly around the IPOs you mentioned?
Well, I guess I think there was some trial on green equity. I think we never get there, but I do think what we see, and so we have a big team that's focusing purely on that, the sustainability bonds. But we figured out that in a way, in terms of transitioning, I think the equity part is an important one, and I guess linking that to private companies and larger companies, I do think we work quite a bit with pre-IPO companies. We're also on the M&A side where we run an ESG work stream, and it's a huge difference. You go to someone like Telefonica, you go to someone like Barclays, we have humongous teams on sustainability who track to report, and you come to a smaller company and you talk to the CFO, the CEO, and he says like, who's going to do that? Like, so where do we start? And I do think that makes a huge difference in terms of where you start very often at, kind of more on the basics on what's the right governance structure and who should be looking after that, what can you commit to, and how can you crack the code, how can you get on the pathway? So I think it's really, we have seen, as said, since I set up the team about 2.5 years ago, massive inflow, because I think on the IPO market, investors, it's pretty clear they want it, they want the information at IPO, and I think it's very hard very often because something else is the focus, and kind of it's often in the process it gets lost. So I think this is where my team comes in. But admittedly, we also now see in the last, I think, 12 months, a big interest on the M&A front, because I think M&A, ESG conscious M&A, we've seen for a long time, kind of investing in renewables and hydrogen, kind of to follow through on your strategy. But what we also see now is, I guess, a more ESG conscious lens on really, all of a sudden you're a majority owner, and I think when you invest, kind of, so once you look at ESG, really dive deeper. And again, this is when we work with the respective companies on sell side mandates, and we usually start 12 months ahead of time to really be able to help them transition and get the right strategy in place. So I think a massive change on what we have seen, and definitely also a difference between kind of the already public company who have much more regulation compared to the ones who are about to get there and a little bit overwhelmed.
And Ed, I mean, I think that's a nice kind of segue into the fact Aviva's one of the, if not the biggest non-bank lender in the UK, and you do work with it's not the Telefonica sized companies, and Catherine mentioned kind of that fear of the requirements and maybe not finding the demands? I mean, how do you respond to that as well? And
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot's changed just in the last kind of 2-3 years. And so if we think about our role as a private markets investor, we're not investing into, FTSE 100 listed companies. It's not the big names that we would all know. We're almost investing into, sometimes family offices or small private companies or growing companies. And, we heard in the keynote about the fact that capital's really waking up and finance is finally starting to get its head around this topic and ask better questions and get a bit more involved. And if I think just about recent experiences over the last couple of years, give 2 examples, right? We set out a strategy to deliver $1 billion of sustainability-linked loans. And these loans they're essentially commercial mortgages, right? That are large loans made to small and typically private companies to support them with their real estate, whether that's getting a slightly bigger estate or whether it's building something new or whatever. And I mean, we imagined that $1 billion, it would take several years to deliver it. And here we are, 18 months, almost 2 years later, we've delivered 1.4 billion. And it's crazy. And it's just because we asked the right questions. So how about for this loan, if we set out and try to reduce emissions, put some solar on the roof and achieve a green building certification? And the companies say, yeah, sounds great, let's do it. And I think if we hadn't have asked the question, then perhaps nothing would have happened. So things are really, really changing because we're asking better questions. Another example, we financed a series of homes to be built with a company called Packaged Living Homes, who are our partner. And in the really early stages of this deal, we were starting to talk about, okay, well, look at the spec of the homes, right? They're pretty basic. They could be a lot better. Gas boilers, pretty poor EPC ratings. Now, people said, when you go and talk to the house builders, they're smaller companies, they won't get it, they won't come along for the ride, you won't get any traction. But we tried, we asked the question, we sat around a table, talked to everyone and said, right, how can we do this better? And everyone got on board. And now we've got a pipeline, our first tranche of 163 homes, EPC rating of A, which if anyone's not a real estate person is a pretty sustainable, pretty good home. Air source heat pumps instead of gas boilers, and you've got families that are going to be moving into sustainable homes. And it's because we asked the question. So I think when it comes to small companies, let's not assume that because they don't have huge sustainability teams that they won't be able to cope with whatever it is they're asking. Actually, some of these companies are fantastic and can deliver incredible things if finance just is in the room and asks the right question.
Yeah, and on that point around questions, I think it's also something we talked about, Catherine, last week, and Sean mentioned transition plans. Transition plans, KPIs, targets, they're all a really hot topic. And really, I mean, how do you balance what's business relevant with what allows Ed or the Tanyas of the world as well to assess that consistently across the board, and really be able to take a broad view of what is good, what is less good, and what, in some cases, is actively bad?
I'll take this. So one point I'd like to make clear is it is true that when you go to smaller companies, they don't have sustainability teams, and they're going who is going to do this? That's true. But actually, I think the secret for bigger companies and the secret for our success is what we're trying to do to transition with KPIs and, getting the whole company mobilized is making the whole company responsible. It's not just a sustainability area. Oh yeah, they're on the 3rd floor. It's like everybody takes responsibility. So everybody becomes their little CEO and their little CFO, and they make the decisions. So it's about transitioning the mentality of everybody. And on the KPIs have to be transparent and they have to be consistent. And I do appreciate, SFD or the principal adverse indicators, it's good to have consistency across multiple sectors so investors can see all things equal. But you need detail. We're talking about hugely complex issues, and companies cannot be measured on the same basis. So, like for instance, in our reporting, we're complementing the principal adverse indicators, and obviously showing all the information, doing the logistics and the housekeeping for investors so that the information is there. But seriously, biodiversity is really important, water is really important, but it's not as relevant for a telco sector as other items. So we need to provide, and we use, SASB and some mobile indicators from sector specific to really fill that gap, And I know you asked about absolute or intensity based targets, and I mean it has to be absolute. How do you, we've got this huge challenge to be net zero. How do you eat an elephant? Well, it's a little by little. Everybody here in the audience has to eat the elephant. And it doesn't matter if Sean eats it quicker than Tom, right? That is a contributing factor, but we just have to eat the elephant. So our targets are all in absolute terms, and so that's it. Sorry.
And from the investor and the banker, how would you? I mean, you've got to keep some kind of benchmarking there.
How are
as
we
well.
eating the elephant?
Sorry.
How are we eating? The
Yeah.
elephant?
How are you eating the elephant? Or how are you evaluating which part of the elephant to eat?
Well, I agree. I think KPIs have to be defined and they have to be material to your sector. That said, we had a big conference, and I do think one of the themes that came out was also around collaboration, because what we very often hear is talking to the respective people and companies. We're busy just finding 3 different angles of the same KPI in the company instead of being able to think about impact. So I do think if we find a way that at least you kind of have some collaboration sector by sector and there are enough initiatives, I think, and I guess we always encourage everyone to join those to kind of define what for your area is material, and can you maybe all agree that those are the 10 KPIs all of you want to define and measure them in the same way. So if you need to report them in your annual report or to the rating agency, that we don't have to kind of look at it from 3 different angles. I think that is an important bit. But then the second one is then also, it is also about your own strategy. And you mentioned that you want to make this a business case. And I'm a firm believer of, if you get sustainability right, it's a business opportunity and you should use it for your business. And that's why maybe we can't all have the same 20 KPIs, but maybe we can have the same 15. And then you think as a company, what is defining me and what's defining my strategy and how can I incorporate that? So I think that probably, in my view, should be the right way to look at it, to make it more efficient, to spend less time. And we have, I would say I have high hopes for someone like the ISSB and different initiatives. Then you have cooperation on more an industrial level where you really kind of find it, and then find your own way on differentiate yourself and make it, a differentiating factor on why someone should invest in you and not the other company.
I think for me, there's always 2 different worlds, right, with KPIs and measurement. The disclosure world, where it's largely regulatory now, especially in financial services, which I think is an incredibly positive thing. But then there's the real world of how are we actually holding people to account, and how are we encouraging people that are actually deploying money into the market or managing assets? How are we actually encouraging those people to pick the right projects and do the right things? And so if I think about our world, 40% of our platform is real estate and the other 60% is direct lending, pretty much, in a nutshell. But on the real estate side, we really only measure 3 things. We measure lots of other things, but that's for disclosure purposes. We measure energy intensity, carbon intensity, and climate risk. 3 golden numbers. And by pushing those numbers through every single risk review meeting and every single investment oversight committee and every single other opportunity that we get, maybe it's too simplistic, but it focuses people in on, if I do X, it will drive Y number and Z outcome will be generated. People can kind of get it, right? And everyone's busy. So I just think, at the danger of being too simplistic, just pick the things that are super relevant, make them relevant to people so that they can understand them, and then just keep doing it. You know, people need to be told, someone told me that people need to be told things 8 times for it to go in. So.
Keep going.
I don't think Edward's children are certainly not my kids, because I have to tell them at least 20 times. Yeah.
So the sustainability champions of tomorrow.
Yeah.
Maybe just one thing to add, and I think what we preach, and I think we hear from our investors, is also ESG-linked KPIs in kind of executive pay. Because if you think, you talk about everyone being their own little CFO, if this starts on the top, right, and this kind of trickles down, it really changes the behavior of a company. And I do think if you set some of, your core ones and you link them and incentivize people, I do think it's a good way also to drive change.
Mm. And I mean, I think what we're also heading towards, in terms of my next question, and Tom mentioned transparency, is the dreaded D word, data. And I'm sure everyone in this room wants to either talks about it day and night at work, or wants to talk about it, wants to hear about it. And I want to put a bit of a challenge to the three of you, which is that, and it's based partly on something that Catherine and I were talking about last week. Obtaining relevant material data is a hurdle, right? And I think the smaller the company, the more difficult that data is to obtain, the more upskilling you might need to do, or organizations like the Carbon Trust. But Catherine, you mentioned something last week. I'm sorry to put you on the spot with this, but that it's difficult to get information on customers' carbon emissions. And I think I hear that from financial institutions as well. Our investees haven't got the right data, so we can't provide the data. And isn't that also just an example, especially in the situation that Sean's mentioned, where we need more now, we need more movement, we need more action. Isn't that just kind of shifting the burden, just passing the buck further down the chain?
Well, actually, from our perspective, it's a huge opportunity. What we want to try and do is, we're well respected because we have a very low environmental footprint and we've been really great citizens. But what the market doesn't know is how much we can help the economy decarbonize. And the only way that we can do that is by showing targets and quantifying it. Now, we have quantified, we have looked, we've done our own research. Our most recent one was we interviewed 3,000 customers in Spain, and then it just worked out how much emissions would be avoided because they have changed their ways, their working ways, because they're able to have this great connectivity. By next April, everybody in Spain, 100% of our network will be fibre. And it's like the first on that scale in the world. Now, we've been able to calculate the emissions, and it's 81 million tonnes of carbon avoided. But of course, with all the greenwashing regulation, we want to make sure that the way of quantifying is recognised according to standards. And the elephant, there are other elephants and they move very slowly. So we have, we founded with other operators, the Green Digital Coalition, and we're working with Carbon Trust to try and quantify that, but it's really hard but our objective is we want to be able to tell the world how much people are saving via our services, via smart IoT, via connectivity. And so it's not really a burden, it's an objective to capture all the financing from my fellow panelists and friends in the audience.
Yeah, and Ed, you mentioned the real estate, and I think that's another similar one around kind of actual energy usage rather than the reliance on EPCs. And is that something that you're pushing as well? You're pushing house builders, you're pushing energy companies to try and get you that information?
On data, I always sort of yawn a little bit when people complain about it. because you don't necessarily, in all cases, need the specific data from this customer or from that part of your portfolio or whatever to actually make a plan. And it always reminds me of the scene in Batman, I think it's in The Dark Knight, where Heath Ledger, and he's dressed up as a nurse. People remember that scene? Yeah. He looks really crazy. He says, "Do I look like a guy with a plan? You know what I am? I'm a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with one if I caught it." And it's a little bit like, it's the same with data for me, right? Companies, oh, well, if we could only get the data, if we could only get the data. But what are you going to do with it when you get it? And people don't always have an answer, right? Some people do, don't get me wrong, but a lot of people don't. So don't wait for the specifics of the answer, because the answer is probably quite obvious, right? And I speak from experience. Over the last 2 years, we have evaluated, mapped, quantified 1,500 loans across 35 different sectors across the whole of the world to work out exactly where we should invest to reduce our emissions. And do you know what it told us? We should originate and invest in more renewables. I could have told us that 18 months ago, right? So you don't always need the precise number in order to make a decision, right? Data and strategy must go together, but you don't necessarily need the perfect data to actually have a strategy.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really interesting. We say that about kind of footprints. It's better to have when you're doing a carbon footprint, particularly as an investor or a financial institution, better to have an imperfect footprint than no footprint at all, whilst you wait for this kind of unicorn of data to suddenly arrive in the future. So I mean, Tanya, jump in. I mean, it's
it's 100%. That's what I tell us.
the
like,
big white data whale.
It doesn't need to be perfect, right? Just get started. Because you don't measure it, how can you ever improve it? So from that perspective, and also when you have hesitation, I was in Asia last week, and similar kind of some companies were a bit like, whoa, do we, don't we need? It's like, if you look at the regulation coming down and the supply chain regulations, if you are part of any delivery chain from a large corporate, it will be coming down your line. And again, this is why we always come at it from a different angle in terms of saying like data is all bad. It's kind of start measuring it, start showing you can improve it, and make it again, try to make this an opportunity, because you can show your supplier, here, this is what we're doing, this is how you can use our data, and we're improving on it, right? And if you have that, it is an opportunity for you in a way. Is it messy? Is it work? Would we all like not to do it? Yes. But I don't think there's a way around it. So I always, I fully agree, is kind of get on with it. It doesn't need to be perfect. And investors, so we speak a lot to public market investors, is, right, no one expects you to be perfect from the beginning, but you need to show you're there on the pathway, and you mentioned it, you also need to follow through with it and not just pretend you're on the journey. And for that, you need to show data, because otherwise, how do you know?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think I was going to jump into regulations and reporting, but I can see some wry smiles. I might just open it up. We've got 10 minutes left, and I'd love to take some audience questions.
Reporting.
Sorry?
Yeah.
So clearly no regulation and reporting.
Yeah, no regulation reporting, please. Any questions? I think we've got some roving mics. Do throw your hands up. Yes. And if you can just stand up and just introduce yourself, and we might take a couple of questions at a time just to keep things efficient. So
okay, Phil Tompkins, Galliford Try Construction Company. One of the points that you made, Tom, is the need for the pace of change to accelerate, and that means taking probably more risks, new materials, using CEMEX in our world, low carbon concrete. It's taking on more risk. Generally, the response to greater risk is for investors to seek a greater return, which then in turn can become prohibitive. So are there any thoughts on how investors may, their thinking around risk allocation and what they're prepared to accept may change to allow greater sharing of risk, and therefore for us all to take on more risk as we need to do?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think there's really, of course, there are multiple answers, right? But I think the main answer is subsidies. So if we look at what happened with renewables, across the sort of mid-noughties through to, just a few years ago, certainly in the UK, subsidies like renewable heat incentive and feed-in tariffs made returns for what were relatively new technologies at the time predictable for investors. And that meant that institutional, low-risk, long-term capital could crowd into those solutions. And we've still got a lot of money ticking over in rooftop solar and utility-scale wind and those sorts of solutions that are backed by those kinds of subsidies. Now, it's not that people are being nervous, right? People don't like risk for good reason. And going back to my opening comment, the reason why we need to take a calculated view of risk is because when you want your payout because something's gone wrong and your house is flooded, or when you come to retire, you kind of need the money to be there, and you probably want it to be slightly bigger than what it was when you put it in, right? So investing with risk in mind is just part of the process, right? So I think subsidies, we have seen some kind of signals around like air source heat pumps and hydrogen from government. Are they big enough, and are they going to drive the scale that we need fast enough of that low risk, long-term capital investing into relatively new risky solutions? Not yet, but I think it's absolutely going in the right direction. I think with a bit more pressure from the private sector, then it could go faster.
Yeah, and I think the IRA is a good example for that, where we all of a sudden saw a massive influx globally on kind of rethinking on where they put the investments. And then, well, we've seen the European response to that, but I do think also regulation and subsidies in a way need to support that development so we see the pace that we need.
But just to go back to basics, there's also still a gremium on sustainably linked bonds or linked financing instruments. So there's still, investors are accepting less return.
Yeah, and I think even if there isn't the demand, I mean, the oversubscription we're seeing on a lot of these transactions is huge. Any other questions? Otherwise, we will have to go to regulation.
Thank you. Yes, hello, my name is Heinz Plattnitzer. I'm here on behalf of DSM für Munich. And my question is, I think the banks, the financial institutions have the power in their hands by allocating the capital in the economy and steering towards more sustainability. And my question is, are there also any very concrete decisions in the directions that you, for example, don't accept certain customers if they're not sustainable enough, or that you exclude certain industries, right, maybe now or in the future, or that you also make concrete that you grant different conditions, for example, by granting, as you mentioned, the bonds, loans, and other instruments?
Yeah, so I mean, Tanya, maybe one for you on exclusions.
On the way, I think you see that Barclays is committed to be net zero, and I think we're one of the first ones, but many other large financial institutions have followed, and we do that on a scope 3, which is for us financed emissions. So we go sector by sector. It's something we call a blue track to measure our financed emissions. And clearly, what that means for us in the long run, and for everyone else who is committed and does it on a scope 3 basis, that if our clients don't move along with us on a net zero pathway, we will have to differently allocate and engage with them. And one of the reasons my team was founded is it's a nice commitment that we don't want to leave clients behind. So if we see someone who kind of keeps moving on that transition pathway, but our benchmark is that, then clearly either we manage to get the client along with us. If not, at some stage we will have difficulties banking them because we have committed to our pathway. So definitely there's that, and there's in terms of the incentives, you'll see we have from green mortgages to different products that we offer that have a green angle where you do see some incentivation, yes.
I think from our perspective, a lot of the money that we manage, 60-70%, is with our Aviva client, right? So it's the life insurance business that's part of Aviva Group. So if you have a life insurance policy, then that's part of your money. They are incredibly forward-thinking, and there's several different ways that they've worked with us over the last couple of years to really kind of turbocharge this stuff. So even just from a few weeks ago, the launch of the largest long-term assets fund, you can look it up, it's on our website, but it's a kind of integrated fund where we're taking a pool of existing assets, so about 1.5 billion of existing assets that are our life insurance clients' assets, and putting those into a fund where we're going to go much faster on decarbonising those properties. And that's a really bold move, right? To move 1.5 billion of assets just like that into a new fund. But that sort of stuff, it just doesn't scare them, right? They've been around, I mean, Aviva's been around for 320 years in some shape or form. Although it'll be their predecessors, they'll be around still in life insurance for many decades and probably hundreds of years more. So taking big decisions, as long as they're the right ones, doesn't scare them. Not every client is like that, but we're very lucky to have them. The Sustainable Transition Loans project, going back to your point about incentivisation, that required them to take flexibility on pricing. They needed to take a long-term view, so providing debt at cheaper rates to small companies, accepting a lower return, but they did it knowing that they would be lending to better companies that were better investing in their own transition plans. So not every client is able to take those very big and very long-reaching decisions, but where you do get clients that are able to do that, things can really happen quickly.
Yeah, and just to piggyback maybe on that, I mean, do you think that on the whole the financial sector is maybe a little bit overly simplistic when they approach those questions? I mean, obviously Aviva and Barclays take a very nuanced view, you know, working with clients, with teams such as yourselves, being innovative, being creative. And I know that, you know, you've had conversations as well with some of your investors where you're like, well, if it's not kind of tech, then the sustainability angle. And so sort of putting that a little bit as a final thought from the three of you around, you know, pushing the boat out, being more ambitious, being more creative.
Well, I think the difference is really if people believe, you know, and if people really want to make this happen. And that's what you see the difference in beliefs between the investors like BlackRock, Amundi, you know, you can see two different worlds apart. And, you know, there is a substantial difference. And in terms of the pathways, you spoke of, you need to match the rhetoric with bottom up, get your hands dirty, absolutely know what little projects have to happen to make this net zero happen on your island, whether it's your company, your region, or your country, you know. So rather than, you know, I think it's a question of having leaders who believe and really want to make things happen. And I think there's a lot of noise around. And, you know, speaking of a non-believer, Elon Musk pointed out last week that the ESG is the devil. And of course, that was because of these ratings, you know, and to use the Australianism, I'll just refer to my previous speaker. But yeah, really, he's actually right. I agree with Elon Musk. Please don't quote me on this, but on that perspective, because he pointed out that tobacco companies who kill, 8 million people every year have higher scores than Tesla, right? And it just because the problem is people are trying to make this easy. You know, I agree that you need to focus on 3 key areas and keep those as your key objectives. But you do need all the data. You do need the pathway to be very clear and marked. And not everybody has the patience. And that's why they rely a lot on ESG ratings. Now, there is the good, the bad, and the ugly. So you can have these ESG ratings, but you have to do the work yourself and understand it. So it's a big target ahead. You have to believe and you have to do the work and just rely on yourselves to do it. That would be my final words.
Any final thoughts before?
Yeah, well, I guess for me, a lot of the issues that we're facing, climate being the biggest one, are systemic, right? But actually, when you really boil it down, it's just made up of people. And invariably, people want to wake up every day and go to work and do a good job. And I think as sustainability professionals and people working in climate, it's an incredible thing to be able to offer them that, right? And it's really changed over the last couple of years where, you know, people aren't pushing back anymore. So I think if we can recognise that there's power in people, right, and people can be encouraged to make good decisions, just to give them the tools and a little bit of a nudge in the right direction, then I think we can really speed things up.
Yeah. I mean, from my side, you know, you asked about targets. We set ourselves a 1 trillion financing target, a new 500 million investment. So I think that's ambitious. It's out there, but I always find it's like not the one solution, right? It's everyone in the room. It's everyone on here. We'll never get there if not everyone pushes and everyone does their bit. So I think this is, you know, where my hope lies, that, you know, we're still gonna make it.
Yeah, well, from myself, the Carbon Trust, I'm sure everyone, Tanya, Ed, Catherine, thank you so much.
Hello. Okay. Sorry, my microphone got borrowed for the Q&A, so I didn't have one. Thank you so much, Pietro, and thanks for that panel discussion. Is anybody ready for a little cup of tea or coffee or stretching of the legs? It's that kind of time. We're going to take a very brief coffee break. We want to do our best to get back on time as much as possible. So we'd like you back in the room at 11:25. And whilst you're having that chat, if some brilliant insights have come in, please don't forget to tag the Carbon Trust at #CarbonTrust. See you back at 11:25. go. Hello, 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 folks. Welcome back from the break. I can see that coffee and mingle was required. Was there a lot of eating of elephants during the course of the break? So welcome back. Great to have you back in the room. 11:25. This is an interesting 11:25, folks. I thought the Brits were punctual, but okay. We'll just know that I noticed, okay? I noticed. Are you ready for the next session for today? Yeah. I think you forgot from this morning how this goes. I feel very unloved. Okay, let's try again. Are you ready for the next session? There we go. I knew you had it in you. You didn't just do all that talking out there and get in here and forget how to do it. So our next session is a keynote all about accelerating to net zero, securing a livable and sustainable future for all. Please give a warm round of applause to the Director of Cambridge Zero, Professor Emily Shuckburgh.
Thank you, and well, it's a pleasure to speak to you this morning. I nearly didn't make it because I've come up from Cambridge this morning and the trains were all cancelled and delayed and there were all sorts of problems, but I'm here. I'm going to be talking to you about, well, really about what the climate science says. I'm a climate scientist by background, about the acceleration to net zero, what we in the University of Cambridge are doing about accelerating towards net zero, and where there might be lessons in all of that for business in terms of accelerating to net zero. So let's see whether this actually works, which it does. There we go. So I wanted to start off with this statement, which many of you will have heard, but I think is just such a profound statement. It comes from the synthesis report of the IPCC from in March of this year, and it says, just in really stark and bold terms, there's a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable, sustainable future for all. And when that, that sounds quite melodramatic in many ways, but when it's on the basis of tens of thousands of scientists and other academics from around the world synthesizing the evidence base, it, to me, is really quite a profound statement and a profound call to arms. And we know, really, the story of climate change. We're starting to see it now unfold before our eyes across every region of the world. And again, this is at the bottom there, a statement from the IPCC report, which in itself sounds like a, almost a definition of just what we're seeing. But again, the fact that it is underpinned by a really strong evidence base is incredibly powerful and important, that we're now seeing human-induced climate change affecting every single region of the world. We saw, I've just put two images up here just, to remind us, the ridiculously record temperatures that we saw last summer in the UK, with 40 degrees being hit in multiple locations across the UK, something that even from the science community we didn't think was going to be happening this soon into the climate change journey. And it's not just, barbecue summer kind of nice temperatures. It was really, we all experienced it. It was really unpleasant, but for some people it was deadly, and it's still being worked through estimates of how many excess deaths occurred in that extremely hot period, but it's likely to have been over 1,000, probably just in the London area. And then the other image that I have up here is just another of the major climatic events that have occurred over the last 12 months, which is a series of floods in Pakistan. 30 million people internally displaced as a consequence of those floods. And even today, there's some 10 million people who don't have access to clean drinking water as a consequence of the aftermath of those floods. So really real-world consequences. The next image I wanted to put up, and again, I just wanted to start off with a few bits of the climate science, because I think there are some key messages coming out of the climate science that are incredibly important and have incredibly important implications for business. This is one of the key figures from the IPCC report. Sometimes it's been called the burning embers diagram or the reasons for concern diagram. It's appeared in the last 3 of the IPCC assessment reports. And it really is an indicator across different measures of the impacts of climate change as to how severe those impacts are at different levels of global average temperature increase. And the really important message out of this is that between the 5th IPCC assessment report in 2014 and the 6th IPCC assessment report earlier this year, the assessed level of risk at different temperature thresholds is now assessed on the evidence we now have to be significantly greater at lower levels of temperature increase. So you see all these arrows pointing down. That's because where you move between moderate to high risk is now considered to be at a significantly lower temperature increase. And the reason I think that that is so important to understand for businesses is because the Paris Agreement, that global agreement to keep temperatures well below 1.5 degrees with an ambition to keep them below 2 degrees, which set the net zero target of 2050, was all based on the information available in 2015, so the information that was in the 5th IPCC assessment report. It hadn't, those targets, that level of ambition didn't take into account the new information we have on the increased level of risks. So that's the challenge. Then how do we start to move towards solutions? And again, another statement from IPCC that limiting warming involves rapid and deep and in most cases immediate greenhouse gas emissions reductions in all sectors this decade. And many of you will be aware of the scale of the challenge that that poses. This graph here is a compilation of, in white dots, the global carbon dioxide emissions over the last 4 decades. And then you see the pathway that needs to be on in terms of emissions reductions. And, in many business contexts that I speak to, people say, well, this looks impossible to achieve that scale of change. And yet, we don't have an option. And yet, there are also some indications where we are seeing really rapid changes of that nature, whether that's in terms of the uptake of renewable energies, photovoltaics, battery technologies, and starting to be electric vehicles. So it's not a lost cause, and that's really important to recognise. It's challenging, but not impossible. And again, the IPCC said this really clearly, that feasible, effective, and low-cost options for mitigation and adaptation are already available, and importantly, also that accelerated climate action, whether on mitigation or adaptation, has significant co-benefits, and one of the most obvious of those is in terms of the health benefits associated with reduced air pollution. So let's dive a little bit more into the challenge. Again, many of you will be familiar with this. This is the emissions for the UK. The last official year of statistics in terms of UK emissions is 2020. We've not yet got the update for 2021. There's always a lag before we get those emissions statistics. But you can see that now UK emissions are about half what they were in 1990. Again, an indication that this is not impossible, but you can also see, as I'm sure you're all aware, that most of those emissions reductions have come from one sector, the energy sector, and yet every other sector needs to transition rapidly to net zero. So how do we start to come up with a global strategy, but a global strategy that then works at a country level, at a sector level, and an individual business level as to how do we make that really rapid transition? And again, the IPCC drew together some of the key messages from thousands and thousands of studies as to what some of the key components of what a rapid decarbonisation pathway might look like. And many of these key messages were the same key messages that then found their way into Chris Skidmore's report, are very relevant to the UK as well. Tried and tested options are already available. Solutions need to work in diverse contexts. Probably one of the most important things is this fairness concept. And that one of the big barriers is many of the solutions exist, but they need to be scaled up and deployed widely. And then there's that interconnection between business, finance, policy frameworks to ensure that you have effective mechanisms across the three that are working in tandem with each other to really help accelerate those solutions. And I'll come back to that point because I think that connectivity between those different dimensions is incredibly important. So if you are an organisation, there's 2 things that you can do towards climate action. You can accelerate the transition to net zero of your own operations, and you can look to how you can develop solutions that can be deployed widely to the net zero challenge. So those are two slightly distinct different elements, and for some organisations there'll be a greater emphasis on one of those dimensions, and for some there'll be a greater emphasis on the other dimension. I wanted just to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing in the University of Cambridge across those two dimensions. So across the first one of our own business operations, this is just one example of something that we've been doing recently. One of the most iconic buildings in Cambridge, King's College Chapel, is got scaffolding on the side of it because solar panels are being installed on the roof of the chapel. This is, I mean, that's interesting and important in itself, but there's two other reasons why I put this up here. First of all, there was a huge monumental battle with Historic England to be allowed to put solar panels on the roof of the chapel in the first place, even though you cannot see them from the ground. And I think that's important because the fact that we eventually won that battle makes it easier for everyone else to undertake those sort of decarbonisation measures. And the second key thing is that you'll see at the bottom these hoardings that have been put up across the front of King's College describing the multitude of different sustainability actions that are occurring. And I think that being able to act as a flagship and communicating widely of what we're doing so that we start to create, to normalise and to create that sense of excitement indeed about the decarbonisation challenge is also critically important. There we go. So the second thing is about creating solutions, and obviously as a university that's a key part of what we're doing. We have an extensive research base that goes across each of those different dimensions of sectors that require decarbonisation, whether that's in terms of zero carbon transport of different forms, including aviation, whether it's about how we can use digital technologies to help accelerate decarbonisation, whether it's looking at that complex case of agriculture and land management, and I'll come back very briefly to talk about that a bit more in detail at the moment. Across each of those sectors, there's different research that's being undertaken in the university. And one of the real challenges from our perspective is not undertaking that research. It's about how do we get those ideas and innovations that are developed in the university context rapidly deployed in the real world. And that requires collaboration beyond the university. And that radical collaboration, I think, is one of the most important elements of how do you accelerate a transition to net zero. So, to my mind, that pillar on decarbonising operations and the pillar on developing net zero solutions only works effectively if it's encompassed within a broader framework in terms of whole systems analysis to ensure that solutions are effective across multiple different dimensions, and a pillar that's associated with that radical collaboration across sectors, whether that's universities, finance, policy, business, in order to together collectively understand how we can accelerate the solutions. And I wanted just to end by a couple of different examples where we try to adopt that broader perspective in projects that we've been undertaking as the university. So whole systems analysis together with radical collaboration. So the first example I have comes from looking at how to decarbonise, or actually even broader than that, looking at how we can change land management, particularly rural land management, for the benefit of climate, nature, and the people who live and work in those landscapes. So understanding those interconnected different dimensions is part of the whole systems analysis, where we've been starting with understanding who are the stakeholders of this landscape, how do they use that landscape, what are their needs, and we've really been deeply engaging from the start with that multiple cohort of different stakeholders, from the farmers to the conservation groups to the various different forms of local government that have interests in the landscapes, through all the different businesses, utility companies and others that have involvement in the landscape, bringing them together to understand what possible alternative land management might exist, and then combining that with a rigorous scientific evidence base to support both our understanding of the effectiveness of different options and putting in place the frameworks in order to be able to monitor alternative land management. It's been a really exciting collaboration, and one that's much more extensive than we would ever normally undertake. But again, that radical collaboration surely is a critical component of accelerating change. The next example, if I can get to it. There we go. Next example where we've done a similar thing is in terms of accelerating the work that we're undertaking towards delivering net zero aviation. And we've done the similar kind of thing of bringing together policymakers, everyone from up and down the aviation supply chain, whether it's the engine manufacturers or the airframe manufacturers or the airports or all the multitude of SMEs that are involved in the aviation sector, together to share technical information in ways that they wouldn't ordinarily do, to put that into policy frameworks, to test different policy environments, working with government and international collaborators as well. Radical collaboration, again, so central to that process. And in terms of some of the engineering advances we've been undertaking, we've tried to adopt processes that come from Formula One in terms of the engineering design process that have been able to radically accelerate the engineering aspect of the solutions that we've been looking at. And then the last example is a project that we actually undertook ahead of COP26. Again, those two components of the sort of whole systems analysis and radical collaboration were central to this. It was a project called The Futures We Want. We conducted it as a collaboration between the university and Deloitte, and presented it at COP26 as part of the UK presidency. And the brief was to create visions of a climate-resilient net zero future for different countries around the world and different regions. And this image here is actually from the report we did associated with the Arabian Peninsula, so UAE and Saudi Arabia. But critically, the project involved that radical collaboration again. It involved us putting together an evidence base as to what was feasible in terms of climate resilient net zero futures in collaboration with in-country academics. And then we took those feasible options to broad stakeholder groups to identify what was desirable. And the products that came out had huge, exciting richness to them and were genuinely inspiring, but also ones that were going to resonate because they've been designed from the start in terms of resonating with multiple different stakeholder groups. Again, same message, whole systems analysis, radical collaboration. So let me leave it there. I hope that's given you a little bit of inspiration, both in terms of, once again, reminding you of the scale of the challenge, but perhaps more importantly, of some of the key messages that I think are really common threads between how, as organisations, we can go about accelerating that journey to net zero, not just of our own individual organisation, but through a wider influence, helping to support the global transition to net zero as rapidly as possible. And it matters because, again, final quote from the IPCC, our choices will reverberate for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Thank you.
That was Professor Emily Shuckburgh. Thank you so much. Two really key things to think about if you didn't already kind of sit with you and hit you smack across the face. Whole systems analysis, another elephant for you to chew, and radical collaboration. And if those are the only things that you take from that talk, I think there's a lot that can be done by just starting to look at net change very differently. Next up, we have really fresh, hot off the press research. Literally just dropped last week, coming in today. How's that for speediness? They say businesses can't act fast. So we have the results back from fresh insights back from some research that the Carbon Trust has done. And here to talk about that research, we've got the director of the Climate Trust's Net Zero Intelligence Unit, Simon Rittelek.
Thank you very much indeed. It's fantastic to be here with you all. It's particularly nice for me as we're next door to the London School of Economics where I spent my undergraduate years. And we heard loud and clear from Emily the importance of being successful in meeting those temperature targets set out in the Paris Climate Change Agreement by achieving net zero by 2050, and the important role that business has in doing that. So after 3 years of virtual events, it feels very energizing to be in the room with the industry leaders who will change the way we do business in the UK in support of our national and international obligations on net zero. So as you heard, I'm Simon Retallick. I've been leading work on climate change-related issues for the last 25 years, believe it or not, ever since I left that place over there, including the last 13 years at the Carbon Trust. And I'm thrilled to be talking to you today as director of one of the Carbon Trust's latest ventures. As you'll know, the Carbon Trust has a mission-driven business model, meaning that we constantly look for opportunities to accelerate the move to a decarbonised future. And with this mission in mind, at the end of last year, we created the Net Zero Intelligence Unit. Now, let me start by reassuring you that this isn't some sinister undercover operation to spy on your net zero plans. The Net Zero Intelligence Unit is, in fact, a new and different way of working at the Carbon Trust. So rather than carry out project work commissioned by you and other clients, we work to accelerate progress on net zero by equipping leaders from the worlds of policy, business, and finance with the Carbon Trust's experience-led insights on the key steps of the net zero transition. We join the dots between projects, sectors, and geographies to draw out solutions and learnings that can help accelerate the pace of change. The unit's focus is on net zero because it's the most comprehensive approach there is, clearly, to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels and securing a livable planet. Net zero is clearly a huge canvas on which to focus, but our work concentrates specifically on 5 conditions we've identified as being vital for enabling progress on net zero. Firstly, awareness and ambition. Progress clearly depends on widespread understanding of what net zero is, and there's a lot of confusion about that out there, why it matters, and critically, the level of ambition needed to achieve it. The second key enabling condition for us is governance. Ensuring stronger governance mechanisms are in place is critical to ensuring high standards of integrity, transparency, and accountability for net zero targets. Thirdly, finance. Public and private funds clearly need to be mobilised to unlock huge investment in decarbonisation. Fourth, technology and innovation. Delivering deep emission cuts will require dramatic scaling up, not just of existing technologies, but clearly of development of new ones, particularly in harder to abate sectors, alongside innovation in new business models. And last but not least, net zero clearly won't be sustainable from a social point of view unless it's fair. Net zero should clearly create a better future for everyone by sharing the costs and benefits of the transition as fairly as possible. The Net Zero Intelligence Unit's thought leadership on these enabling conditions draws on the Carbon Trust's 2 decades of experience, as well as new research. We work across 4 key areas to help support decision makers. We publish high-quality, experience-led research and advice, some of which you can see on the screen here. We also engage directly with decision makers through meetings, roundtables, and contributions to industry or government-led initiatives. Thirdly, we forge partnerships. We heard just now about the importance of partnerships with like-minded organisations in the worlds of policy, business, and finance, because we know that we can't deliver this sort of change alone. And finally, we contribute our expert intelligence to key debates in the media on global net zero developments. The Carbon Trust is self-funding this work because we know that net zero is the greatest and yet most complex challenge facing decision makers, including business leaders like you. And we think the knowledge and insights that we have could help. Now, before talking about our own research, it's worth reflecting on research by the Net Zero Tracker that was published last week, some of you may have seen it, which sheds some light on the business challenge. Encouragingly, it showed that globally, businesses are continuing to drive momentum when it comes to setting net zero targets. 929 companies from the Forbes 2000 list now have net zero targets. That's more than twice as many as this time 2 years ago. However, that same research found that when businesses set targets, they don't always lead to robust action. A year on from setting a target, few of the companies assessed had begun implementing the key steps required to demonstrate net zero integrity, such as Scope 3 targets, or a conditional approach to the use of offsets. Clearly, there's further to go in order to unlock progress. And it's vital, in order to do that, to understand the barriers which businesses face on the way to net zero. It's only by paying close attention to this that together we can drive ambitious and credible climate action, including identifying how organisations like the Carbon Trust can provide the most effective help along the way. So to learn more about the key challenges your organisations are facing, we conducted research into business barriers to net zero. Hot off the press, as we were hearing, we've just received the initial findings of our research, and I'm very pleased to share a taster with you today, ahead of the publication of an in-depth report on the survey in September. This research involves surveying over 400 senior sustainability decision makers in large businesses in the UK, Germany, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Mexico. In large businesses with over 1,000 employees from sectors ranging from ICT, retail, manufacturing, finance, and energy. I want to start off by painting a picture of UK business commitment to net zero from the survey. We found that 2/3 of the UK businesses surveyed had not just a net zero target, but a science-aligned one, SBTI-validated net zero targets. However, when asked how confident our respondents were about meeting their emission reduction targets, just 12% of the UK businesses we surveyed expressed total confidence. Our research revealed the top 5 barriers that seem to be affecting this. Firstly, 1/3 of businesses told us that aligning net zero with other organisational priorities is a key barrier. And linked to this, businesses pointed to concerns about the ability of their company to grow while progressing towards net zero. Clearly, making the business case for net zero can be a major challenge in large, complex organisations. Being climate leaders brings concerns about moving first and the potential cost implications of the rest of the market not being ready yet. We also know that SBTI's emissions reduction pathways can sometimes prioritise linear decarbonisation when some companies may need the opportunity to grow or change in a non-linear way. Fortunately, the complex and transformational thinking that is required for net zero is being increasingly recognised by voluntary initiatives, including SBTI, through their sector decarbonisation pathways. Another example is the ongoing work in the EU, which the Carbon Trust is supporting, to develop a methodology for evidencing how a business's product or service might be avoiding emission hotspots elsewhere in the market. These developments will help businesses, we think, to connect net zero to future-facing business transformation rather than treating it as a competing priority. The third most cited barrier from our survey to net zero that business told us about was that they feel held back by concerns about getting it right in the face of external scrutiny of progress. Now, we know that the heat is definitely on for businesses on this front. It can clearly be challenging to communicate your business's climate progress and face scrutiny from all corners. For net zero target setting, SBTI offers a way to demonstrate scientific alignment. But when it comes to the actions you're taking to meet those targets, we know it can be challenging to show that your organisation is on the right track. Businesses need help navigating the complex world of net zero integrity, and we must make sure that the prospect of scrutiny doesn't hold businesses back from doing the right thing. The fourth barrier, which I imagine will come as no surprise to many of you, is the difficulty of Scope 3 decarbonisation. This is a huge challenge, and for most businesses, clearly Scope 3 accounts for about 90% of value chain emissions. The businesses we surveyed highlighted cost as the major barrier to Scope 3 decarbonisation. Businesses told us that measuring Scope 3 progress is a challenge. Unlike Scopes 1 and 2, which are within businesses' control, measuring progress on Scope 3 relies on accurate carbon calculations from suppliers and partners. This makes for a complex task, but fortunately, emerging global sustainability reporting requirements, such as through the International Sustainability Standards Board, will help to make data on carbon footprints more visible and more accessible. And finally, businesses highlighted the difficulty of securing organisation-wide buy-in on the steps needed to transition to net zero. Delving a little deeper, only 40% of businesses told us that they had sufficient board-level engagement to deliver the organisational change required for net zero. And similarly, only 40% were completely confident that their sustainability team has the right level of expertise to create and deliver a net zero transition plan. These concerns are understandable. Net zero will require businesses to bring all their decision makers and employees along on the journey. When net zero is positioned as something just for the sustainability team to worry about, rather than important to senior leadership and the overall organisation, there is a risk it can be seen as a burden to staff, rather than part of the future direction of the business. I want to add some detail to one of these barriers in particular, and to invite you to consider how it affects your business's climate change journey. I mentioned earlier that the Net Zero Intelligence Unit sees improved governance as one of the key enabling conditions of net zero. Accountability and transparency on net zero targets are growing concerns. It's clear from our research that businesses feel the same way. 80% of respondents told us that potential regulation on communication of net zero progress is a concern, and 79% highlighted greenwashing as presenting a major reputational risk to their business. This builds the case for verification and communication of progress being selected by businesses as the second most important element of a net zero strategy, and 88% seeing independent external validation and verification of progress towards net zero as important for credibility. Clearly, the pressure to do net zero right is front of mind for businesses, and this is clearly really welcome. And it's something we're very conscious of at the Carbon Trust. We want to help businesses to feel confident, not just in understanding what net zero means for them and setting appropriate emission reduction targets, but also in taking the next steps towards meeting them, and then communicating this progress to the wider world. It's vital that business feels confident doing this, not least because it can create a virtuous circle in which other actors, such as governments, help to accelerate progress towards net zero because they can see that meaningful action is being taken elsewhere. Figuring out the barriers to progress on net zero is, of course, a vital task. But the point of identifying barriers, of course, is to focus our efforts on finding the right solutions. Reflecting on the key barriers businesses highlighted, I want to end by saying a little more about how they might be overcome. On the challenge of aligning with other organisational priorities and growth, it's an inescapable conclusion that businesses will need to think in a transformational way. Net zero is an opportunity rather than a reason to stall growth. The future will favour those who grow sustainably by decoupling growth from emissions and resource intensity. As a first step, conducting a climate risk and opportunities assessment, such as through TCFD reporting, can help to identify a resilient and relevant business model. The next challenge is bringing your whole business on this journey with you. A good approach here is to recognise, as we heard earlier, that your employees are experts in their field. They can help you to bring organisational change and to navigate it. On the issue of Scope 3 decarbonisation, there are changes afoot globally to help with this barrier. Reporting requirements will help to make carbon footprint data more visible and available. This will then help with the crucial next step, identifying your key levers for change within your supply chain or end-use emissions. And there will be an excellent opportunity to learn more about Scope 3 decarbonisation with our Carbon Trust experts in this afternoon's workshop. Finally, on the risk of greenwashing, open, transparent, and accurate communication is clear here. It's key and should be business as usual for all companies. No businesses can possibly have a comprehensive step-by-step net zero plan to 2050. It's therefore more important to show how you're improving now and what you'll do to instigate the transformational change needed for net zero. As the requirement to publish a net zero transition plan looms, especially here in the UK, Businesses who get ahead of the game by communicating with authenticity will avoid the charge of greenwashing and help to drive economy-wide change. Before I wrap up, I'd like to invite you to look out for our full report being published in September, in which we'll offer more insights into business barriers to net zero and how to overcome them. We hope that the report will stimulate discussion amongst business leaders and on the most effective ways to deliver a net zero transition. Lastly, please do get in touch if you'd like to share your organisation's experience of delivering change. The more we can learn from each other, the better our chances of making this great transition to net zero a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simon. Lots to think about. Particularly that net zero is actually an opportunity and it's part of the future of business success, not a hindrance to it. And just that little mindset shift, or really big mindset shift, depending on the state of your organisation, can have a really huge and profound change. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. We've been talking about the science, we've been talking about the research, we've been talking about the opportunity, but how exactly are companies making some of these changes? Our next panel dives precisely into this, because I'm sure some of you are sat here going, this is all nice, but what the heck am I supposed to do with it? Well, we're getting to that. That's coming next, and also in the second part of the day. So the next panel is all about ambition, action, accountability, progressing climate change transition plans to address the climate. We're going to be featuring 3 entirely different sectors, so we get a very broad spectrum of what the art of what's possible. And this session is going to be moderated by the head of Green Finance at the Carbon Trust, Tiffany Aries.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me at the back. So yeah, I think really inspiring morning so far. We've heard, like we just said, we've heard a lot about the science, we've heard a lot about the research. And on this panel, we're really going to talk about the action. But so before we dive in, we're going to do a quick round of introductions. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do at your respective organisations. We'll start from the end.
Thanks so much for Carbon Trust inviting me. It's great to be here with a like-minded group of people. I'm Tuze. I'm head of sustainability for Dr. Martens. I've been at this company for 6 years now, and it's been amazing going through the whole change in this space. I don't know if I hand over first or do I continue?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Thanks very much. So thanks very much for having me today. Danielle Mulder, I'm Group Director of Sustainability at the BBC, and yeah, I have the lucky job, I guess, of setting our net zero strategy and delivering against that. The brief is actually net zero, nature positive, and people positive at the BBC. And the reason for that is because we have a huge opportunity to actually use our voice as well as get our house in order and achieve net zero. It's our voice and influence that actually drew me to the BBC, so it's great to be here. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ian Heisman, Director of Sustainability at the house builder Taylor Wimpey. So we've been doing work on this space for quite some time. We issued our environment strategy back in 2021 that had a climate pillar, a nature pillar, and a sort of a circular economy type pillar. But we're very, very proud to have issued our net zero transition plan just in March this year, with a very structured plan to become net zero by 2045 across all our homes, really challengingly across our supply chain, but also our building sites. So we're now communicating and integrating that into our business processes.
Amazing, thank you. So diving straight in, I'm going to start with kind of a first discussion point. I'm not going to say it as well as Catherine did from Telefonica this morning, but so we have talked about how buy-in within organisations and having kind of full buy-in within all the departments that are going to be necessary in order to make your transition plans a reality is a barrier and is really important to achieving that goal. So Keen to hear how, within your respective sectors and within your respective organisations, how are you ensuring and what are the things that you're doing to overcome the challenge of gaining that kind of full organisation buy-in? And, you know, what are the learnings?
I can start. Yes. Yeah. So Dr. Martens, for those who may not know, is a British footwear brand. We've been here around since 1960s. We have a planet, product and people strategy. This has been signed off by the board for over 3 years now when we became a public company. And one of the things that on the journey that we had was important is that board level champion and board level buy-in into the strategy. One of the things that we courageously did when we became a public company is to actually publish our commitment for net zero and other sustainability targets. So that created quite a harnessed all the energy from the company. And I think the other thing we've did to be able to continue to move and progress with this is to try to decentralize. From the central sustainability team, we have 5 people in our team, but actually the whole change happens on different functions. So the governance, to the point previously that Simon mentioned, is quite important because everybody has something to contribute in the agenda. And I think through that process, our job and my job was to really try to translate of all the science and all the technical bit about the carbon and the climate into something that everybody could understand day in, day out in their job. So those are the few things that I believe that really helped company to start with it and then continuously move towards the progress.
Yeah, and I mean, like we've said earlier as well, it's about you have experts in each part of your organisation within those specific departments, and it's about making net zero relevant for them and kind of getting them on board and seeing what they can bring to sustainability teams and their innovation and ideas. Is that the same for you, Ian?
Very, very much so. I'd sort of like to start with almost the context. I had hair and nice black long hair when I started this about 40 years ago. And since then, it's been pushing a boulder uphill until a cultural moment about 4 years ago. And I didn't really understand, and I still don't understand why it happened, but there was a shift where it was a priority for people when historically it wasn't. I think it was some sort of critical mass built up, and there was a change. And obviously our organisation is aware of that change and feels that change among lots of critical stakeholder groups. So local authorities declaring climate emergencies, investors really talking and going deep into this stuff, customers wanting to know about their homes. So a lot of our key stakeholder groups. So that really set the context for change within the business. So it was almost a tipping point among our senior leaders as well. So and it was almost a top-down thing, at least initially. And a lot of that came through the investor route, if I'm honest. And that's really pushed us into committing to a net zero strategy and publishing our net zero transition plan. But obviously there's a lot more to an organisation than that. So we've worked very carefully with all the functional leads over the last year and a half to try and work out what it means to them. And now we've published our plan, we're going back and revisiting that again because we didn't have a plan to talk to them about. So now we're going through with all our functional leads. We need to go to we've started to go to our management teams in our individual businesses. But there's a lot of conversation to be had, and it won't be a quick piece, and it will take a lot of time to bed in, not least just because of carbon literacy, as an example. We've had some experiences where there hasn't really been a good communication because we've been talking in too many TLAs or 3-letter acronyms, and we haven't really been communicating well. So we need to go back to the drawing board a little bit with our management teams and talk about, first of all, vision and purpose, and then practical delivery, and sort of miss out all the corporate stuff because that's not really what's going to motivate them or drive action. So we're sort of revisiting that at the moment and looking to drive it down. But we're there with the senior management team, with the PLC, with the heads of functions, but we've got a long, long way to go to drive it deep into the business.
And I think, so many excellent points, and I think communication is so key to making these transition plans a reality. I'm keen to hear, so obviously BBC, lots, experts in external communication. How has the communication been internally, and are there any learnings that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been pretty tough. You really do need that mandate from the top down. sort of permission, really, to do this. So, and I've been, prior to the BBC, exposed to different companies. Unless you have the CEO, or in our case, the Director General, saying we're going to be net zero, it's tough. You know, you've got a cohort of people that get it, want it to happen, but a bottom-up approach to this doesn't work, in my view, and you really do need that mandate from the top person. So how do you get that mandate? Well, in our case, actually, it's Sky. There's a button called Sky I press when I'm in senior meetings, and I just sort of occasionally just go, yeah, well, Sky doing it, or, you know, Sky said it. And that one really worked with a very competitive Director General. Right. And then you get to the point of, right, okay, how much is this going to cost? It's the next question, isn't it? Actually, in our case, I mean, it's really different for different sectors, and I think we don't talk about that enough, actually. So in our sector, we have a power problem and an energy problem, because when you commission, produce, transmit, distribute media, you need a lot of energy to do that, yeah? So we have a clear planetary boundary related to carbon emissions because of the power consumption that the media industry uses, right? If you're Sainsbury's, to get to net zero is a nightmare. You know, I met them the other day, and they're selling sort of 250 million SKUs a week, and the supply chains are really complicated. If you are a mining company, if you're an aviation company, if there was somebody that makes concrete, I mean, this is tough. Some of it is really difficult to eliminate those carbon emissions. But we can get ours into sight. So if we turn the energy system green in the media industry, we can crack net zero. So you get to it. You get to the point of, right, let's have the money conversation about how much is it going to cost the BBC to meet let's talk about our scope 1 and 2 target. And we literally laid it out, went across 266 offices, looked at all the key initiatives that we need to deploy, everything from energy optimization to heat pumps to degasification to switching our fleet and transitioning it to an EV fleet, etc. Went through it, and it costs £36.4 million to halve our emissions by 2030. Yeah, so this is an organisation that has a turnover of 5.6 billion. It's not a big number. I mean, it's much harder, as I said, for some other sectors to do this. And then the good news is, you calculate the uplift or the benefit of doing that. It's £55.8 million worth of benefit that you get back. So the BCR is 1.4, and it's really, really clear. So I took that to the Exco, and I said, the good news is I can save you cash. You have to pay a bit up front, but by 2030, we'll be delivering to you a recurring benefit of 55.8 million. So that tension goes away. And then BBC Studios, which is the commercial entity of the public service part of the BBC, have figured out now that this is a USP opportunity, right? So if they can tell every client that comes knocking on their door, including Apple TV, BBC, Netflix, and this is the game in media now, it's quite interesting, that they can deliver low carbon productions at a competitive price or at the same price, therefore eliminating that organisation's scope 3 and delivering on their net zero ambition, that puts them ahead of the pack compared to all the other independent production companies. So we're now in a different place than we were before about negotiating this, because of the Sky button, press it, it's quite good, and also the fact that this is becoming clear that this is a no-brainer, and it's a business opportunity for the BBC. It's the future.
Definitely, and I love that so much. The insight of how do you create competition between peers in the same sector, and how does that drive momentum? And I'm sure there's many in the room. Lots of your peers are here today. I think it's really important to learn from each other and also to encourage movement in the sectors. You talked about investment and return on investment, and I'm keen to hear how you all have managed to kind of gain investment. Obviously, it's great making all these transition plans, all these climate plans. How have you managed to kind of gain investment in terms of innovation, partnerships, people? And what's your journey been like in that space? Maybe start.
For us, it's quite different than BBC. We don't have a Sky button, but we have a few other footwear brands button around the board. But for us, it's very, very important, the material element of it. So how you make the shoes, is the leather, is the outsole, is those that are the material impact materials. So, and when it comes to, working with the Carbon Trust, we did at the same time carbon footprinting and climate risk and opportunities analysis, which was a great actually learning doing it at the same time, because it really clearly showed what are the biggest changes and biggest investment you need to think about. So that focus gave a lot of behind-the-scene information when we decided to invest. So recently we've invested, for example, to a recycled leather company called Gin Phoenix, together with other companies like Tapestry or Jaguar, because everybody wants to use the leather of the future and everybody wants to translate leather into the future. And leather is an amazing material, by the way, but we need to definitely have a better source of leather. So it was a great opportunity to think about what could be the future of, the same Dr. Martens, but maybe low carbon impact. The other thing, again, through the work of the carbon footprinting and risk and opportunities assessment, is the circularity of the fashion now. So how do you actually continue to use the shoe? If it's a durable, if it's a timeless shoe, you wanted to keep it on the ground instead of throwing away or sent to second markets. So we've invested to do a re-commerce strategy. So one of the key pillars of the business objectives for Dr. Martens is to have a profitable repair and resale business in the future. So really thinking about different business models rather than the linear one. And the excitement that it created, obviously, with the people, even the employees, because our employees are our consumers, are the wearers. And that's the other thing that I think we saw, that there's going to be a great future to be able to get to net zero.
Yeah, and I think that, that links up so well with, we need system change, and I think that's a really good example of how, we're changing business models that, were historically just selling products, and now you're selling products and services as well. I'm keen to hear your thoughts, Ian, on how the built environment is involved in this sort of system transition, circularity.
Okay, do you want the investment question as well?
Yeah.
Okay, both. Fine. So house building, this is probably investments very specific to the sector model. So if you take the homes, for example, they're regulated. And it'd be great to say that it was cheaper, but it's actually quite a lot more expensive to build an eco home. So we've got, perhaps in a couple of years, air source heat pumps, solar panels, we've got wastewater heat exchangers, we've got triple glazing, better fabric, etc., etc. So that costs thousands of pounds more than we had historically on a traditional type of build. But for the house building sector, that means it comes off the land value, because the land is worth less because the build costs are higher. So actually the developer doesn't carry those costs, the landowner carries those costs, so that's positive. So provided that the landowner's still willing to sell for housing. So in some of the really challenged markets in sort of poorer areas, it might be the case that they can't afford to build these eco houses, and all the investment will go to the more wealthy areas, and there just won't be the investment in private housing in those areas. So there is knock-on consequences. In relation to our building sites, actually, there's a reasonable balance. The energy efficiency savings almost pays for the investment that we need to make. So there is quite a nice balance. And for supply chain, we're just not quite in the investment phase. It's a massive thing to decarbonise concrete, decarbonise bricks, decarbonise tarmac, take all the diesel out of the earthworks. So there's a massive piece there that we haven't quite got our minds around the investment equation. In relation to the bigger picture, the circularity, it's all basically one thing ultimately, and I think it's probably a message that will come here. It's not just net zero, it's circular economy, it's nature-based solutions, it's just transition, and all of those are sort of concentric circles that sort of map towards one final destination, and we've got to sort of put back our linear thinking and our silo thinking and join it all together in some sort of systems thinking approach, and that's the only way we're going to get it all to work.
And is that what you see being kind of your biggest challenge at the moment, would you say?
I think it's going to be one step at a time. So we've got the net zero transition plan across the line. The next step's probably going to be around the wider nature piece with science-based targets for nature and the Task Force for Nature-related financial disclosure. So there's going to be a huge data piece, another big investor piece, another cycle. The idea that nature is as important as climate is raising but not there yet. There's going to be a huge play on that. And then we're probably going to be caught by the CSRD as well. So we're looking at 2028 for a whole bunch of social and governance type metrics and processes. So there's sort of almost a decade of action, and we're sort of almost, it feels like a lot that we're doing now, but if you sort of look to the future, there's almost an exponential additional set of tasks to do and achieve to really reach this collaborative system thinking piece for business.
And yeah, I mean, so many interesting points, and again, coming back to collaboration, do you guys see collaboration really as an enabler as well? And is that something that you think will play more of a role in your sectors going forward?
Yeah, look, yeah, we collaborate all the time, actually. So at COP26, the media industry came together on climate content pledge. That was a big moment. It was actually, at COP, it was registered as well. That's kind of interesting that the media industry has made a move here to sort of say that we're all going to commit to integrating the latest climate science across all of our output. And actually today, the BBC is taking it a step further. We're actually committing to a journalism climate pledge version of that climate content pledge as well. So. Tomorrow I'm meeting up with Sky, our friends at Sky. I do like them. ITV Channel 4 to talk to them, and BAFTA Albert to progress what we're calling an industry breakthrough strategy. So we've got a problem with Scope 3. It's for us, it's really tough. It's tough because the data's changing all the time. It's estimated, and we also don't want to do this on our own because it doesn't make sense to do it on our own because we all share the same supply chain. And so it really does benefit us to come together on this and to work collaboratively. So yeah, we've basically been developing we're not going to get there, guys, with a net zero BBC or a net zero ITV or a net zero Sky or Channel 4. We need a net zero media industry. And that requires a bit bigger thinking and sort of systems change. So what do we need to do in order to achieve a net zero media industry? And how can we all pull together in the same direction to achieve that? So tomorrow we're actually meeting to get into the specifics about that in terms of these are the themes that we need to go after. And, no guesses, yes, it includes energy, but it also includes nature as well. And then put some metrics and targets against that as well, so that we can have a really clear ask of industry. Because, I mean, we're the big guys. And obviously, we've got teams in place and business cases, as I just outlined, and investment that we're putting into this because there's a business benefit of doing that. But the smaller guys, the indies that we work with all the time, they don't have this, and they're just saying to us, what do you want from us, and help us. And it does need to be a partnership thing, not a we're telling you what to do thing. And this is another demand that we're going to be putting on you. So yeah, that's the approach that we're taking, sort of radical collaboration. I like that word, but it does mean compromise sometimes as well. It's not all kind of like positive. Can mean no. We have to have a tussle about this and figure out how you're going to do things. So it does come with compromise sometimes.
Just to add to that, I think definitely industry collaboration is in the fashion, apparel, footwear sectors, but sometimes it's also cross-industry collaboration. So in our case, for example, like I said, leather is a big material impact area for us. And when you look at the leather and where the hides are coming from, you end up in the meat industry, and that's where you want to go together to the same direction. And those conversations need to happen because none of us, separate industries, are going to be able to do that. So we need to help each other and then, make some uncomfortable conversations as well. Compromises, to your point. That is very, very important.
Definitely, and I think, actually even making sure these conversations are taking place is so important. Like you say, all industries are linked and we all need each other. And I think this is why these events are so great, because you can meet people in other industries and share challenges and share solutions as well. I'm keen to hear what you guys are most excited about for your respective sectors, and also potentially how you think you might be working with other sectors in the future. Let's start with construction.
The timing's good. Just at the moment, we're opening up our 5-plot trial in Sudbury, in Suffolk. So we've got 5 homes packed with alternative technologies, underfloor heating, infrared, alongside all the more traditional future home standard type technologies. We've also landscaped the areas with nature-friendly planting. We've put in hedgehog highways, bug hotels, bee bricks, bat boxes, bird boxes, etc. And we've got a development and a showcase that's pointing the way to the future of housing. So that's really exciting. I think what I'm most excited is about the bigger transformation and what we mentioned before, and that there's kind of enough momentum now to pull us onto a journey into quite a different place with quite a different set of priorities for business, where we're not judged solely on financial performance, but there is a genuine judgment on social and environmental performance. And I think that's really absolutely what's needed at pace within the next few years in order for us to avoid the problems that the first speaker from Cambridge was speaking about. So the big transformation piece is exciting to me.
So what are we doing with other sectors?
What are you most excited about?
What am I most excited about? Well, look, I think climate change is not a good news story. But what I see happening in the BBC is a positive energy connected with this, genuinely, with teams of people. There's somebody in particular in news at the moment. I think she was a production assistant, and she's just taken this and running with it. You're going to watch someone, you're like, wow. And I guess we're quite fortunate with the purpose of the BBC and the motivation that can generate. I think what makes me excited is seeing people respond to this and the energy that it can create. Because it's not a good news story. There's no sugarcoating. I mean, what is coming is not great. And that sort of links to the sort of like how do we work with other sectors as well. So the role of the media is to tell stories. There's lots of roles that we play in terms of informing and educating as well. But we're good at storytelling now. That's what we do as an industry. So when we come together, all of us collaborate within the media industry. We've got an event that we're going to be running, which is connecting with other sectors as well, to sort of say, look, how can we tell the story of the future, in effect? Because we need to talk about what's coming. We need to tell people the truth about what's coming. And the media plays a role in that cultural shift, right, as to what that future is going to look like. And that does include our built environment. What's that going to look like? What's the food system going to look like? What's the transport going to look like? What's the energy system going to look like? And to articulate that potentially visually, but also tell the stories of that as well. So it's a serious topic, but I think we can play quite a vital role in supporting that shift towards a sustainable future and what that looks like.
And for me is Dr. Martin stands for rebellious self-expression. That's what we say. And if you think about what the brand can influence the consumer, the voice of the brand, the voice of the company when you put these boots on, I think using that and in being able to influence the wider, younger generation, and I think that's why the e-commerce opportunity to be able to repair and resell, that circularity, and then creating that successful new business model in the fashion space is actually kind of quite exciting for me, and it really fits well with what we have. Is durable shoes, is timeless. We make most of our, this is the 1460, 1461 boots that we make, has been lasted forever, and it's going to last, in the future as well. So how can we use the voice of this one boot and then turn into something that is a kind of enabler message for the climate and for the future sustainability?
Yeah. Such a great positive message to end on, I think. I think we're going to take some questions from the audience now. So I think we'll have a mic being handed around, but if anyone has any questions for any of our panellists, don't be shy. Oh, got one at the front. Oh, and one at the back.
Thanks very much. That was very interesting, especially when you're talking as consumer brands about your upstream management of the products and services you're selling. But my question is, for those brands that consumers have a less direct relationship with, because there's either less choice or because it's handed to them and they're expected to buy, we're talking about water, banks, energy, what kind of responsibilities do you think that they should have? And I'm asking that question because tomorrow in London, my 12-year-old in year 8 is having a big debate about how can or if UK consumers can be net zero by 2030. So is it regulation that will accelerate this? How are we as consumers going to have transparent messaging so we can vote with our feet? Or do we have no choice?
I love this. Yeah, we do a lot of pushing it on the consumer, right? When we talk about this quite a lot, to be honest with you, and it doesn't feel quite fair to sort of keep saying, you know, let's push this onto the consumer. I mean, we have an ability to make some selections, don't we, and to use those choices to make some change. But you're absolutely right. The whole system needs to change, and everybody needs to play their part. And you know that does involve government. Government needs to sort of set the scene and the policy framework for this, and then business needs to respond to that and play their part in this. Finance has a huge role to play in terms of providing the investment required for the transition. And then consumers as well, and in some markets you're absolutely right. There's a difficulty. There's not this opportunity to deselect or to make a greener choice, is there? So it becomes harder for you. So yeah, I think if you look at a lot of the IPCC reports and stuff, there is a sort of behavioural change element to this in terms of the consumer opportunity, but it's not as big as changing business. Or changing the way we regulate business, or bringing finance into the room. Yeah, there's a limitation for what consumers can do, but we have a part to play. But there's a limitation. It's good to be honest about it.
For the house buying public, I guess in some senses they don't get a choice because the standards of the houses are regulated, but that doesn't matter much in the sense that our consumer research has indicated people really care, and that environment is a top 3 or a top 4 concern for customers and consumers. But what we have found is that in our demographic analysis that there's a 15% deep greens who will genuinely pay a sort of 10% we won't pay for anything other than what we have to pay, and a nudgeable big section in the middle in terms of customer. But I think the customer journey is absolutely vital, because what's happening in the home building sector is they're going to have a very different house to live in. It's going to be not gas fired, it's going to heat up less quickly, it's going to be different technologies, much more complicated to run. Some people struggle with the programming on their gas boiler at the moment. This is going to escalate that. You'll have your EV, you're going to have your solar panels. You're going to have to be much more active in the way that you operate your home. So a big part of the challenge is finding that interface that really allows people to live in their homes simply, and technology's got a big role to play there as well, with individual radiators that can be controlled with remote turning on and off, with more intelligent systems in homes. So there's a big piece on the consumer, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be that easy. There's also going to be some benefits. For example, the idea of green mortgages are coming to the fore, where the money that you don't spend on your energy bills can go into a more generous mortgage. So you've got a better choice of a house, better choice of perhaps where to live with a greenhouse than perhaps you would with a lesser house. So some good opportunities as well. But we're finding that there's a lot of resonance, particularly among nature. So the people are loving. I was just with someone yesterday, and they were delighted about the nature on their new development. That happened to be a Taylor Wimpey development. So I was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time. But our research also indicates people care about the materials. So we have sustainable forestry, we have sort of our insulation made of bottles, but people are interested in that and want to know about that, and we want to message that more strongly perhaps than we've done before. So some big changes for consumers, but it's generally welcome. They want those sustainable lifestyles.
Just to add on that, to Danielle's point, I think especially in Europe, the legislation and the regulations are really pushing for the companies to put the information on the product. So there's a French legislation coming in on the, for our sector, for footwear or the garment, the labeling of the products is coming quite fast. I don't know, this is going to be super challenging, but I think we are all trying to figure out how we're going to do that, to be able to give that information to the consumer, so the consumer can make those decisions when they spend their money.
Definitely. Yeah, I think we've got a second question.
Can you hear me? Yeah, there you go. I'm Thomas. I work at Nestle. The question was about something that you said, Danielle, regarding how some of these initiatives can become USPs for our businesses, and balancing that out with collaboration or radical collaboration. So I'm thinking about my business in particular, where we have an R&D investment arm, and we develop sort of, for example, for coffee, more sustainable, like genetically modified variants for coffee plantlets. I think it would be a difficult pitch to my business to say, okay, let's give this to our direct competitor, because obviously it's required a lot of investment.
Yeah.
So how does that balance out with the idea of the USPs, the things that you focus on from sustainability, and that radical collaboration for your industries?
Yeah, no, we're kind of figuring that out. So everybody has different boundaries on this. So I'm not going to name names of my good friends, but some of them are a little bit more like, I'll share this, but not this. And you see that going on in the room, right? And so we tend to come together where it's benefit for all, right? So when the sum is greater of all the parts, you add this thing up and it aggregates it and it benefits us all. So Scope 3 supply chain engagement, we could all go to our respective suppliers and have a conversation about, please give us your data, please give us your data. Please respond to CDP, whatever it might be. But it's just far more effective if we all go together and say, we've got this collective ask, and it gives you data. And also collective ask, we're gonna phase out diesel generators, and make this a sort of standard. So we are figuring out those boundaries as an industry as to where we want to collaborate. We don't collaborate on everything. Some things it's best to sort of, all of us are slightly different as well. We're different from Sky. Sky it's becoming more of a tech company, like a platform company. It has Sky Glass, for example. We don't make TVs at the BBC. We have we're a public broadcaster. So everybody's sort of figuring this thing out in terms of what their respective boundaries are, and where you need to sort of retain your sort of competitive advantage on this, because they do exist, and where you want to play as well. But yeah, I think it's for each sector to sort of figure that thing out really and go for it, because there's definitely areas where it just makes sense, particularly on Scope 3, that you can scale this thing by working together rather than in competition with each other.
In fashion, actually, there's a good example of that. There is an organization called Sustainable Apparel Coalition, where probably many of the big brands that you know today are members of that. So when they go to the suppliers to get the data, the technology enables that actually. The platform called HIG Index, that the suppliers, where basically all the brands are buying together, the supplier is giving that information to all of them. It is shared, so you go with the one request, and it also empowers the supplier as well, because they are, on the other hand of the Scope 3, is the one that have to receive and answer all these questions. So, and I think that is, quite an interesting learning that from one sector to another could happen as an enabler for that.
I think similar sort of arguments in the home building industry. So lots of things are too big for any organisation to change. So while we're a few % of the total number of houses that are built in any year. We can't shift our supply chains that are perhaps global cement and concrete conglomerates. But we're going to meet up with CEOs of house builders in a couple of weeks through the Future Homes Hub. And now we're going to start to put those sorts of questions. Can we collectively shift the supply chain? And there's a much better chance to do that. On the other hand, there is proprietary technology, and we've got our air source heat pump in the roof trial at our Sudbury site, and we probably guard that a little bit and try and make that a selling point if we can demonstrate its efficiency and that it works. So I don't think the two things are necessarily mutually exclusive. I think you need both.
Do we have any other questions?
Sorry.
How are you doing? Charlie Cannon from Ballymore Homes. I suppose a little question for the construction industry. With so much legislation around housing to do with fire and safety and kind of need to rapidly get these innovative products into the home building, how do you see that kind of working with legislation, like to get a product standardized for the home builders? As you know, takes a long time, and what we need is pretty rapid, and the embodied carbon of the houses being a large majority, I'd say, of the carbon footprint of the houses. How do you see that working?
Yeah, there's absolutely some huge challenges out there. I mean, in the current regulations and the Future Homes Standard 2025, there's a whole bunch of new technologies, and it's quite easy to say that, but behind that there are some massive supply chains, complex supply chains with different players in. There's actually the skills to put them in and integrate them into designs and deliver them across a very complex supply chain and trades. In addition, the embodied carbon piece is a little bit earlier and isn't regulated at the moment, but we don't even have a measurement methodology that's agreed to measure embodied carbon in homes and developments at the moment. There's various things out there, but there isn't a standard like there is for the in-use carbon. So yeah, don't take away from the scale of the challenge, but because there's a very, very clear policy position from government that's getting translated into regulation, people are willing, able and acting and getting ready for the future and acting on it. And we'll work out the details of an industry. I think what the home building industry is very good at is delivery, and if the technical challenge is clear and the direction is set, that the home building industry, given a sufficient runway, and will deliver on the zero carbon agenda.
Oh, got a question at the front. Right.
Hi, thanks. It's Victoria Hughes. Just have a question what you think about education at the moment. So in terms of school and college and university education, do you feel that's sufficient in terms of meeting the future needs of society?
Probably not. I don't consider myself an expert in education. We've got some apprentice schemes that we're leaning into now, actually, to bring people into the team, into my team, from university. And, you know, it's great. And it's really moved on, because I studied environmental science, I think it's about 15 years ago. And it was quite different then. There weren't that many courses that did it, I don't think. I did it in Sydney, actually, at Macquarie University. And but now you see lots of different courses coming onto the market. You know, some of them are specific around carbon, aren't they, and net zero. And so this whole educational area has really matured. I mean, look, kids get this. You know, I met this guy the other day, and he was sort of saying that he has more intelligent. This wasn't at the BBC. He has more intelligent conversations with his 6-year-old on climate change than he does at the board. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's pretty worrying. So kids do get this, don't they? And they really want to, you know, embrace it. Yeah, I'm sure that we could formalise this more in the curriculum from an early stage, and then they would just love it. We do have, you know, children's and education as part of the BBC, and we do as much as we can, actually. In fact, we're doing some impact analysis at the moment against Frozen Planet 2, which we made a Minecraft version of it.
That's great.
And, you know, it was great. We did some analysis against it, and we videoed some of the kids that were using it in primary school, and we're connecting it to what they were learning about, and then they were using the Minecraft game as well in the classroom, and then at home with their parents. And you hear these kids sort of saying, it's great, and I learned about climate change today, and I could pick the penguin, and I could pick the environment. And they really did, they really do get something out of it. There's an educational kind of connection there. And obviously what we do with our output with the National History Unit as well. So, yeah, we're on it. But, yeah, I think there's a lot more to come.
My son's going to an A-level college next September, and we went to the open day, and I thought, crikey, we're in an age of sort of polycrisis, existential crisis, climate, nature, AI, and that should be part of the founding charter of every single educational institution, that we should educate our young people, so and as you say, they love it and they get it and they want it, so that we can steer away from these crises. And I think that's absolutely fundamental. We're working a little bit with the Department of Education, so they've got some really interesting programs going on, sort of climate champions, but also this idea of school grounds as a national park. If you add up all the school grounds together, they are the size of Greater Birmingham, and if you can green that, you can have I think it's probably the biggest national park in the country if you sort of see it in that way. So in our small way through our school visits, we're sort of promoting those sorts of ideas in the areas where we develop. So.
I think my connection is with my kids, actually. One's 8 and 11, and there's a constant debate at the home about this. You know, they all both try to become a vegan and vegetarian, and you know, there is that coming definitely. But I think that question about like the consumer change, they also want to change their T-shirt because their friends bought a new one. It is more exciting now, or the Roblox is showing something. So. You know, I think that's the one. But I think I can see that it's definitely part of it. You know, we're talking about BBC. They always come with an exciting videos about, you know, they're shown in the school about climate change. So it's going to be a completely different, you know, conversation in the probably next 10 years with the kids. It's so easy with them. You're right.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining the panel today. It's been super inspiring, and I hope you will all have taken away some positivity from the panel and some actions to take back to your own businesses as well. And obviously, do mingle over lunch as well. And yeah, learn from each other. I think that's something that we have talked a lot about this morning and in this panel. We can all learn from each other, and we need to. In order to kind of meet and make our transition plans come to life. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Tiffany. So let's continue this deep dive into the art of the possible. We're now going to have one after the other, 2 case studies to showcase what is actually possible when it comes to becoming to your net zero journey. The first case study is going to be from Siemens, and it will be discussing how they've been working on discussing their journey en route to net standard with the Carbon Trust. They're going to be giving you loads of examples, so have your pens and papers ready. Please give a warm round of applause to Louise Harry.
Good afternoon. Delighted to be here with you. And if I can have my first slide. Wonderful. And the next one. That's great. So I wanted to start just with a history, really, of Siemens. So Siemens has the privilege of being 177 years old in the UK. So it was here at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution, and here we are today in Industry 4.0, the digital revolution. But in terms of our sustainability track record, we formed our first environmental protection department in 1972, so just before I was born, actually. So I think, you know, sustainability and the desire to have a business that operates in the right way for its customers and the society around it is not a new idea to us. And for me, I've been in Siemens 5 years, and it really is a privilege to kind of come into a business that has that legacy, that genuinely cares. But just a few details on sort of how we've been progressing, but very rapidly in the last 20 years on our sustainability journey. Okay. So, we currently are operating under our degree framework. So somebody mentioned acronyms. We love those in Siemens. But you can see up there, obviously, the D is decarbonisation and what I'm going to discuss today. But actually, there's a huge amount of interlinkage between all of these elements. So, you know, the ethics that govern how we operate as a business, the governance, which is a big part of what we have worked on over many years with the Carbon Trust, about, you know, how we actually make our journey to net zero in the right way, resource efficiency, equity. Equity is a big one that I've become very passionate about. You know, this is really talking about the value and our societal value as Siemens. So thinking about, you know, we just had the question about education and green skills and training and what we're going to need. And actually a big piece of what we need to do as a global business is really drive that equity piece as well. And employability is really looking at all of these other elements that bring sustainability together for our employees. And that sits alongside, you know, our customer value propositions. You know, again, I'm pretty fortunate in Siemens because a big part of what we do is deliver sustainability for everybody else, yeah? So sitting alongside the desire within Siemens to deliver degree, we also have these customer value propositions around decarbonisation and energy efficiency, resource efficiency, and actually that societal impact that we want to deliver. So, I'm going to talk in two elements today, and Emily mentioned this earlier. It's about sustainability in our own operations and then our sustainability as a business as well. So if we just have a look at our net zero operations at the moment. So again, I'll refer back to what Emily said about, you know, we are at a really critical stage. And 2 years ago, I think Siemens just became aware that actually we're probably sleepwalking into a climate crisis, and the targets that we had set for ourselves weren't good enough. So actually we took a decision in 2022 to accelerate our net zero journey. So you can see those numbers that are up there. So we have a new target for 2025, which is a 55% reduction against a 2019 baseline, and then a 90% reduction by 2030. So this is based on our scope 1 and 2. Part of the reason we want to accelerate those own operation targets is because we know we've got a lot to do in scope 3, and that's the tougher piece, and we're going to need the time. So we've decided to really accelerate own emission targets in as far as we can by 2030, and then really, you know, continue to focus on scope 3. The numbers I'm showing you there are actually the UK numbers, but just to give you a sense of what does that mean for Siemens as a global business, that means that we have recently announced a €2 billion investment in new factories. So these are state-of-the-art factories that are going to be digital factories across different sectors of our portfolios. So in Shenzhen, in Singapore, and in Bicester, Oxfordshire. Yeah, we're getting a new magnet technology factory there that's going to be pretty much like nothing else we've built in the UK before. It means we're going to be investing an additional €600 million for our own buildings, and actually for electrification of our fleet. Fleet is a painful project for us right now on that net zero journey, so some big investments into that as well. And then another key part actually is that we're investing 200 million in training and green skills and apprenticeships for the future. So we currently have our top 200 leaders globally out in Lausanne at the IMD, going through a pretty full-on boot camp on what does sustainability leadership mean in the regions, so that we're taking everybody on that journey with us. And all of these items are sponsored by our managing board in Germany, so it is a very, very top-down driven program. And then, you know, we've got some really great grassroots projects that I'll give you a few demonstrations of that as well. But you can see for us that is a very significant financial investment. And to do that, we have to grow our business to be able to deliver that financial investment. So, you know, growing the sustainability initiative with our customers and leveraging what we're able to do and demonstrate that within our own technologies in our own factories is really important to us as well. So working with the Carbon Trust, so we were one of the Route to Net Zero pilots here in the UK. So we assessed, you know, our scope 1 and 2, and we did a little bit on scope 3, which is our sort of business commuting, really looking at, where we've demonstrated reductions, are they confirmed, you know, thinking about anything that could be classed as greenwashing, so really working hard with the Carbon Trust to look at that qualitative analysis and our governance also as well. So that was, you know, it's been a very useful journey for us. So on to some Siemens examples. So we have a drives factory in Congleton that actually became carbon neutral towards the end of 2022, so 8 years ahead of plan. So just a really lovely story about Congleton actually. So we currently build nothing or change anything in that factory unless we've built it digitally first. And this is the really key technology breakthrough for us at Siemens is, you know, we are a technology company as well as a manufacturing and an engineering company. You know, we have the ability, so the whole factory has a digital twin. So we are able to assess any change that we make in that factory before we physically go and build it. So you have a resource efficiency, you know, which is going through the roof because we're not wasting time and we're not wasting resources building things that don't work out for us. But I also wanted to highlight there a local community project that we've supported, which is called the Havana Weir. So we also, because Siemens is an older business, we have this wonderful legacy of retirement alumni who tend to retire and then get quite bored. And this has happened with a few of our colleagues who've retired from the Siemens factory, you know, amazing engineers who took a look at the river that runs behind our factory and actually said, yeah, we can build a hydroelectric plant for you in there. So they launched it as a community project. It was crowdfunded. So it's an Archimedes screw on an old weir drop that is now providing hydroelectricity. So Siemens, we gave all of the control system products to actually make it operate, and we now have a feed in from that weir that's actually providing electricity for our EV chargers on site. So it's a lovely closed loop project, you know, utilising the skills of our community, but also providing, you know, electricity into that wider area as well. You can see that obviously we're making some very significant savings in terms of energy cost at that site as well. You know, and the ultimate plan is to take that factory totally off the grid and for it to be totally self-sufficient. So it really is quite a shining light in Siemens globally at the moment. So other examples, so we have a facility up in Hebben. It's the old Rayroll facility that Siemens acquired about 30 years ago. Again, it's a legacy site. I think it's about 120 years old, maybe a little older. So that's currently being converted with heat pumps, so we have no gas at that site anymore. We've got a full rollout of EV chargers coming in, but again, it's about you know, turning as much as that factory digital as we can. Now, this is a facility that, you know, takes in old oil-filled breakers. You know, we've got bitumen, we've got some really dirty, heavy industry going in there for refurbishment. But again, it's about a good circular economy there, that actually we're taking in product that's sometimes 40 or 50 years old, totally regenerating it and putting it back out into the market. So it's a really good example of heavy, dirty resources that we're taking in, cleaning up and putting back out into the market. In our Wythenshawe and Hindley Green, so these are around Greater Manchester, both of those sites have biomass, and PV has been a big investment there, and again EV chargers. Those sites actually supply low voltage products into construction. So we have design authority in the UK for some of that. So we've done a lot of work around packaging, you know, utilising, again, trying to become very resource efficient as well as carbon efficient in those operations as well. So as I said, you know, fleet is quite a painful topic. It's the one area that, you know, because it's also an employee benefit to a lot of people. So balancing benefit against sustainability, I would say, is one of those tricky decisions for us at the moment. So at the moment, we use an internal carbon pricing within Siemens in the UK. So we effectively internally tax all of our businesses based on their CO2 emissions. And all of that pricing is coming back in and funding actually our EV transition, particularly around charging infrastructure for our fleet at the moment. So if I look at sustainability that we are providing out into our customers, so a couple of interesting technology projects. So we've recently been working with Yorkshire Water, and this is about pollution prevention and clean waterways. So very clever use of AI and IoT technology. So Siemens was already, one of the things we do is kind of process flow monitoring. You know, that can be in water, it can be in gas. You know, we build a lot of control systems that monitor and help our customers monitor exactly what they're doing. So with Yorkshire Water, we designed a system that actually is then learning from, you know, pollution incidents that have happened, and it's become very autonomous, and it's beginning to predict. So at the moment, using the system, they currently have a 50% reduction in pollution incidents year on year. So we're now talking to a lot of other water companies in both in the UK and actually globally, and taking this kind of new product that is, you know, it's just AI and it's just learning and it's being predictive and it's warning you when you're going to have a problem so that you can prevent a pollution incident. We also have Siemens Sensei, which is doing the same with car manufacturers. It's predicting, you know, when perhaps you're going to have a failure in your robotics so that you're lessening the downtime in your system. So again, you don't have that waste of resources, overuse of energy, because everything is being monitored and predicted and controlled. So it's it's the future technology. And then the second example I wanted to give you was around University of Birmingham, who have challenged themselves to become the world's most intelligent university campus. So we are doing a huge rollout, again, of IoT sensors. So, you know, just monitoring the whole campus. That's all feeding into a building management system. Again, monitoring usage, how can it be more efficient, as well as sort of, you know, assisting the university with renewable energy installation. But, you know, one of the key parts here is the installation of the sensors, which is a division called Enlighted, so it's all IoT, and that again is beginning to learn the patterns that are needed within the campus in Birmingham, but also out in the UAE. So, you know, again, so that the control systems become automated and more efficient. Again, customer benefit, so for University of Birmingham, first year has generated 3,000 tonnes saving on CO2, and their aim is to become a decarbonised campus in conjunction with Siemens by 2035. I think the other nice thing about this is some of the learning lab and the environments that we're creating with the university itself. And actually, this is a project that, while it starts really about perhaps energy and their desire to become a decarbonised campus, you know, we're now working with them on well-being strategies. We're working with them on engineering strategies. So it's really becoming a whole ecosystem of all of our kind of ESG projects that are overlapping, perhaps led by decarbonisation and the route to net zero, but again, in a desire to enable net zero for those around the business, you know, we're finding there are huge societal impacts as well. So that was a steamroller through, because I did want to leave time if there were any questions for anybody as well. Okay.
Questions. However,
we
are running a bit behind schedule, and I don't want to stay too much between these lovely folks and lunch, because I think they might then think of me as lunch, and I'd rather not be the next elephant to be tackled. Thank you so much for that share and giving some really practical, tangible ways in which things are being handled. Finally, to wrap up just before our lunch break, this next session is going to explore the key risks and opportunities presented by the digital transformation of GHG accounting. We've spoken a lot about the money today, and this is going to dive more specifically into and around critically and accurately looking at Scope 3 emissions and accounting and data exchange. To give us that insight, we have the Climate Action Manager from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Lorette Semenek.
Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Lorette Semenek. There we go. My name is Lorette Semenek, and I am a manager at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, or simply, as it rolls off the tongue, WBCSD. And so I work in our carbon transparency team, so naturally a big part of my presentation today is now focused on Scope 3, unlocking decarbonisation through real supply chain transparency. And so I'll focus on a couple of, or three key points. So why supply chain emissions transparency is essential and the opportunities that it creates, the existing challenges and unlocks, and finally what you can do now. So for many companies, as we've heard sort of many times today, Scope 3 emissions represents the bulk majority of their emissions, north of 80% for many, but it's also their least understood and least directly influenceable, and this is because we rely on the emissions data and action of those in our supply chain in order to understand and address them. However, they're also essential to sort of ensuring that we make effective business decisions. And this is specifically moving beyond secondary data to that product level emissions, specifically for setting accurate decarbonisation targets, identifying where exactly to target within your supply chain, and also tracking performance. So currently, because of that reliance that we tend to have on secondary data, which, don't get me wrong, is a great start, it's also not perfect, which means that there's a significant proportion of the world's emissions today that are currently unaccounted for and therefore are not being reduced. And this makes Scope 3 emissions both our greatest decarbonisation challenge, but also our greatest decarbonisation opportunity. However, fundamental challenges do prevent transparency and across supply chains, and these largely boil down to two key areas, and this is data access and data quality. Starting with data access, so this a lot of the time comes down to the idea of how do we actually exchange primary product level Scope 3 emissions data, and at the moment this tends to end up being via Excel spreadsheets, via email, which then you imagine having a supply chain that's incredibly long. Imagine being the last person that asked for that emissions data. By the time you actually get it, it's likely out of date, and then the person that's already hitting send each time is probably being pretty fatigued. Not to mention there is also, and understandably, an increasing number of technology solutions that are working to digitise carbon accounting, which again is great. However, there's also a lack of standards that actually sort of produce standards on how technology solutions should, I guess, regulate the way in which we share data in an interoperable way. And that second challenge, as I mentioned before, is around that data quality piece. So it comes down to existing standards, whether that's the Greenhouse Gas Protocol or that's ISO. They're flexible and they're not sufficiently specific on how we should be calculating our Scope 3 emissions data. So that means that, for example, you could be using ISO standard. Your company that you're exchanging with is also using the ISO standard, but because of that flexibility and the approach that you can take to it, it means that you end up having emissions data where you're comparing apples with oranges rather than apples with apples. The second point of that data quality challenge comes down to that secondary data piece. So I also want to say that sort of secondary data is a really great start. So that's the idea of like data averages, that industry averages, that spend-based data. It's great to have this information, but we need to move to primary product level emissions data. And this is because the final footprint is often above or below that true emissions value, which comes down to that amount of emissions that's currently unaccounted for and not being reduced, which then nicely flows into why many companies consider only Scope 3 data at that corporate level rather than that product level emissions data, which means that those targets and those decarbonisation plans and those actions that are being taken don't necessarily reflect the true impact of emissions. Perfect. Now imagine a world where you could calculate and easily exchange emissions data like you do, for example, with financial data. So if you're not familiar with financial accounting, and frankly, fair enough, financial accounting requires that accounts be prepared following the basic principles of clarity, relevance, reliability, and comparability. These standards, or these principles are enforced through global standards and national standards and regulation and audits as standard practice. Now, this enables financial data to flow from one company to the next along a value chain in the form of purchase orders and invoices. The same approach needs to be adopted, but for carbon accounting. So we need to have carbon footprint calculations that are harmonised, that are shared in an open, digitally enabled manner across technology solutions and platforms. We need to have access to standardised emissions data at every step of the supply chain for specific products as well as services in the forms of a carbon invoice. And it's only with this sort of data and this sort of capitalisation of the idea of the existing ERP systems that we'll truly be able to easily and at the scale needed sort of understand and decarbonise our supply chains. But the good news is, imagine no longer, solutions do exist. So one of the examples, or one of the solutions that I'm going to sort of speak a little bit more about today, excuse me, is called the Partnership for Carbon Transparency, or more snappily known as PACT. So PACT is the global standard for calculating and exchanging primary, excuse me, just grab a glass of water. Perfect. So PACT, as I'll just start that sentence again, PACT is developing the standard for calculating and exchanging primary product level Scope 3 emissions data. So it's enabling companies to make carbon-informed decisions. And the way that we do this in 3 key ways. So first and foremost, it's through our calculation methodology. And this calculation methodology harmonises emissions accounting standards, but for the product level. And this is endorsed by both the ISO and Greenhouse Gas Protocol. The second way in which we're doing this is through our technical specifications. And with these technical specifications standardise data exchange across the value chain. So this is really addressing that sort of data access issue or challenge that I just mentioned before. And finally, the third area in which we're doing this is through driving collaboration across the entire ecosystem. So we work with over 150 stakeholders and more than 2,500 businesses to ensure that there's alignment across carbon accounting. So this comes back to the idea of why PACT now has that endorsement of both the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and as well as ISO on that product level Scope 3 emissions data. But it also means that, for example, if you use CDP for your overall corporate emissions, they last month announced that they're going to align their system completely with the PACT framework for product level emissions, meaning that you'll be able to input your data for the corporate level as well as your primary product level emissions data into that also. So just to delve a little bit more deeply into what these sort of two, well, the first two areas that we've got within the PACT framework. And so that first one, which was our overarching methodology, which is called the Pathfinder Framework. And this is an industry agnostic accounting methodology for that product level. And so the second version of this was launched in January this year. The first version was launched 2 or so years prior to that. And so what this framework does is it really seeks to address those challenges that I mentioned earlier around the lack of harmonisation, the lack of consistency across product level Scope 3 accounting. But it also encourages companies to get started and begin providing pathways for them to actually take action and to take action now. And so it builds on those basic building blocks of emissions accounting through calculating the PCFs, the data integrity, assurance and verification, so ensuring that the data that you are getting is trusted and is accurate, and also that data exchange piece, so enabling you to sort of share it consistently with other companies. And the second piece that we've got is around our Pathfinder network. And this comes down to that emissions exchange piece that I just mentioned a moment ago. And so our Pathfinder framework, or our Pathfinder network, enables a standardized technical language to exchange product carbon footprints across any technology solution. So our vision for this and what we're doing is that product data is exchanged in a standardized format using the same technical language across any technology solution or platform. So if I was to give an example about this, is if you were to think of an email, for example, you might draft a message of that email, and it doesn't matter whether you're sending your email to an Outlook account, a Gmail account, a Hotmail, or what it is, that email is still able to be sent because the rules that underpin how emails are sent have been established and are there. This is what we're seeking to do with emissions data, ensuring you as a company to share your emissions data with any company, regardless of the system that they use. But the key thing I want to, or the key distinction I want to make is that we're not in itself building a platform that hosts emissions data. What we're doing is we're creating that technical infrastructure, or that glue, that allows that data exchange. And this is for 3 key reasons. And the first reason for this is that it's, 1, more inclusive. So anyone can share that PCF data, regardless of what company and where. It's designed to connect, so it comes back to the interoperability piece. And thirdly, it gives you complete control of your data. So this comes back to that critical point, and what we hear a lot from our members, in particular at WBCSD, is around the criticality of data sovereignty. So what this enables is that you can control how, when, what emissions data is shared with your supply chain. But one thing that I also want to sort of mention is that whilst these solutions do exist, but fundamentally, Scope 3 is a challenge. So that's why we need to start with a few products and suppliers in the first instance. So regardless of where you are, you're not expected to sort of come up with the solutions and transition from secondary data to primary data overnight. And for this reason, we've sort of put together a couple of, or 4 sort of key areas in which we start supporting particularly those companies that are very early in their journey to start taking action now. And that first one comes down to sort of taking a top-down approach. So as you begin on your your product carbon footprint journey, focus on the most material products. And you can do this by sort of looking at the secondary data that you already have to understand, where is the biggest sources of these emissions coming from. Secondly, from a strategic perspective, assess your suppliers, your key suppliers' maturity, and tailor your PCF accounting requirements accordingly. So this comes back to that point of we're all at very different stages of our Scope 3 emissions journey, and we must take those with us, but also to incentivise progress along that supply chain action also. Thirdly, it's iterative, so begin small. Again, it comes down to what I just said around you don't need to do this overnight. begin small, key material products and suppliers, and learn by doing and establish that process. Continue evolving each stage of the process, add to an additional product, etc. And finally, this comes down to collaboration, and this is something that has been sort of echoed many times today by the idea of inviting suppliers to be part of your journey, but to also critically share the knowledge with each other. So don't harbour that information solely to yourself. And I guess, as I was thinking before, is like a sort of Lord of the Rings reference sort of came to mind. So I'm not sure, do we have any Lord of the Rings fans in the room today? I'm going to say I can see the whole room nodding their heads. Perfect. It's not nerdy, I'm from New Zealand, it's just patriotic. So I guess the key point on that is, so Scope 3 emissions learnings, like it shouldn't be treated like the one ring to rule them all. We're not Gollum, it's not our precious. We need to think of ourselves sort of more as, I guess, as hobbits in this sense. So we need to actually work together to collaborate, particularly in these joint challenges, to sort of reach these outcomes that we do have there. So I guess what I would do is I'd just boil what I've just said into sort of 5 key steps. So feel free to sort of take a photo of this. And this is applicable regardless where you are in your Scope 3 emissions journey. So whether you are more advanced or just starting out, it comes down to identification, collection, incorporation, collaboration, and expansion. And this is an iterative process. So you will do this again and again and again until all of your supply, all of your products and services are sort of catered for. So I guess the 3 key points that I sort of want to leave you with as I wrap up my presentation now, it comes down to no single company can tackle Scope 3 on its own. Collaboration is critical. So what I'm really saying here is don't be Gollum, be Frodo. Solutions already exist and are being implemented, so you don't need to wait. You can take action now. And finally, perfection is the enemy of the good. Challenges will always exist. They will always seem hard or always seem easier to stick with the status quo. But the most important thing is to start and to keep improving. Thank you.